Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 12, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Number 2, Part 1. Welcome to The Crisis Tapes. I'm Adam Murdough.
And I'm Peter Rios.
And we're back once again. Now, the hits keep on coming from us crisisologists here. We got back into the groove here, and we're not getting out of it. We are continuing with our series of episodes talking about the Crisis on Infinite Earths maxi-series itself. And we did the first issue in 2 supersized episodes, and gluttons for punishment that we're right back at it again with issue 2.
That's right. We're back only short of just 2 months.
That's pretty good by our standards, really.
Yeah. So, has anything happened? Any new? I thought we might start off with anything that something random. Like, did anything crisis-related happen to you in that time? Like, just random things that popped up, or did you go back issue hunting and find something that was crisis-like, or anything?
Well, I went to the London Super Comic Convention earlier, in March.
Mm-hmm.
While I was over there, I met and had a lot of pleasant conversations, and even a bit of a barter exchange with a listener from Scotland named James Richardson, JamFeb on the forums. He and I exchanged a can of Pennsylvania Dutch birch beer and a Hershey's Cookies and Cream bar for a haggis and a can of Earn Brew, which is kind of like the Scottish version of Coca-Cola. It tastes to my American palate a little bit like carbonated orange-flavored iced tea. And one of our conversations concerned something that James found over there, which was copies of the monitor appearances from GI Combat. He found GI Combat number 275 over there in London. I mean, those things are hard enough to find over here in the States where they were produced. The print runs are pretty small. And I think they're pretty much universally the hardest monitor cameos to find. And if it weren't for Scott Akers out in Washington, I would never have been able to finish up our Monitoring the Monitor episodes because I would not have been able to find those. And James goes and digs into bins in London and happens to find them there. And he tells me the one that he's still going to have trouble finding is the Jonah Hex monitor appearance, number 80-something. I'm not sure of the number. And I told him that I found that issue, but I had to go to Toronto to find it. So apparently these things are easier to come by out of the country than they are here in the States.
Yeah, I certainly don't have that GI Combat one. I've never seen it. I think I lie. I think I might have seen the monitor image online somewhere from that particular issue, but I've never held it in my hands.
Yep, and I cannot claim to have done that either. I had to use a PDF version that listener Scott Akers was kind enough to produce for me. So, yep, neither one of us have had that pleasure.
And all those war books at the time, they were all coming to an end. I'm sure Blackhawks, if it wasn't already canceled, it was soon to be. Sergeant Rock was closing up. GI Combat, and I think there might have been 1 or 2 more, but there weren't many of those war books left in DC at that time.
Yep. End of an era in many ways.
Yeah. Well, I had 2 semi-crisis related things, nothing really special. I am on a hunt to collect all of the Legion series from '89, the acronym series.
Oh, right.
Yeah, with it takes place shortly right out of Invasion, and it's kind of the precursor to Legion of Superheroes to some degree. They tried to put something that was in the present DC continuity, present time, and it featured the son of Brainiac and a bunch of other characters, and Lobo would eventually appear, and of course, so would Lady Quark. So I had that series and sold it off, as I am usually want to do sometimes when, crazy whims, my eBay whims, and at some point in the past couple months, I said to myself, well, that's just foolish. How can a big Legion fan like me not have this series? So I went and found a whole bunch over the past couple months, but just recently I found almost 20 to 25 issues, 25 cents each, in good condition, and scooped up a whole bunch of stuff. And, Lady Quark is in that in one of her major appearances post-Crisis. So...
Doesn't it eventually come to light, though, that the Lady Quark who was with the Legion was like some kind of alien, shape-shifting, parasitic creature?
I believe she was actually, having not read it in a while, I believe she was killed and taken over by this creature thing. My memory is fuzzy, but I seem to recall that happening near the end. The last year of that series was never really my favorite. And they did the whole thing, like they called her Dark Quark. And, so someone, I'm sure, will correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was really her, and then she was taken over and put in a coma, because you really didn't see her much after that, if at all. So...
Yeah, I really can't think of any Lady Quark appearances between Legion and Infinite Crisis, come to think of it.
Yeah.
At least not, present day in continuity, in current continuity.
Right. The second one is super topical. As we record this, just yesterday, Convergence issue 0 hit the stands. And... I sort of thought maybe it would have some kind of Crisis feel to it, but it really doesn't. I don't know if you've read it or not. I'm not going to talk in depth about it, but...
I have read it.
Okay. Outside of the playing around with the multiple Earths and the multiple versions of Brainiac and the DC's universe, different versions of DC's timeline, it feels a little bit more. I don't know what it feels like. I'm not sure what it feels like. What do you think?
Well, when I first heard the announcement about Convergence, the first thing I thought of was actually Mark Waid's The Kingdom. Not Kingdom Come, but The Kingdom. The miniseries, sort of fifth week event thing that at the very end of 1998, beginning of 99, that introduced the hypertime concept. Mm-hmm. And reading this issue, that sort of bore it out. A little bit of that, and also probably just because it was Dan Jurgens writing it, a little bit of 0 Hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely more both of those things than Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right. So, wasn't especially with me being so behind in any kind of anything dealing with the New 52, really felt like I was coming into the middle of something here, and I can't say the dialogue helped too much. The scripting of it didn't help me out. It was kind of confusing at a certain points, but I
think I know the points you mean.
Yeah, another big DC event that. I think I'm more interested in those miniseries because they're bringing back certain creators that haven't been around in a while.
Yeah, that is pretty exciting. See some of these people get to do however brief a little stint of work for DC again, mm-hmm. and just to see these various characters and these defunct iterations of continuity get a chance on the big stage again for 2 months. I'm actually, I don't know if you've heard, but I am locked in at DCBS, DCBservice.com. I've ordered their bundles of both the first and second issues of these Convergence miniseries. So I'm going to be reading all of them, and we're going to do an episode of Comic Geek Speak proper, where we're going to talk about the first issue of every single one of these things.
Oh, I got those bundles too.
Okay.
I mean, how could you not? It's one thing, because I certainly was going to pick and choose. Batman and the Outsiders was one of my favorite series, and anything Legion and New Teen Titans and Titans, they were going to touch on one of the storylines from Titans right before Flashpoint hit. What else? Captain Carrot is showing up, Ambush Bug. I mean, come on. So I picked the option and just said, you know what? I might as well do it like this. You're getting the entire series for half off the cover price. I can deal with that.
Yeah. Shane told a similar story. He just was trying to pick and choose, but discovered that he was picking and choosing more than half of the miniseries anyway. So why not just go whole hog and just save yourself some money that way.
Yeah. Cool.
So, that's kind of and then that's a Crisis anniversary event, ostensibly. So, whether it bears any real similarity to Crisis in the end, or whether it's more like the Kingdom 0 Hour and/or Countdown Arena, remains to be seen.
Right.
But still, it's worth a mention on this show.
That's right. I totally forgot. They were really hyping up the whole 30th anniversary of Crisis, even though it's 3-4 months late. But yeah.
By comic book time. As long as it's within the year,
Right.
Well, Crisis was being published in April of 1985, as surely as it was at the beginning of the year.
We did get some feedback. I don't know if you had a chance to look at anything, but I thought it might be fun to pick out just a few things. One of them talks about... I always like this idea of being a crisis kid, of someone who was there while the event was coming out and how did it shape them or what did they remember. And Shark Jumper says it was mentioned about people reminiscing about the series when it first came out. I remember reading that first issue, January of 85. My dad had to drive into San Francisco and I tagged along and talked him into stopping so I could buy some comics. But he wasn't sure which store. So while my dad did his business, I clearly remember being parked in the station wagon around the piers of San Francisco, reading that first issue while Tears for Fears Shout played on the radio. So 1985.
Let it all out. Well, thanks for that Crisis Kid reminiscence, Shark Jumper.
We did get one. Deadpool, really quick, said, okay, you talk about Crisis Kids. Well, I'm going to be a Crisis Tape Kid. Since he hadn't read the series, and when we started this spin-off podcast back in 2009, he decided he was going to read along with us. So today he read his first Crisis issues.
Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, Eddie. And that's it. Yeah, he lives down in Australia. Deadpool does. And Eddie, man, I hope you're listening. I apologize. I haven't given you any feedback on that comic book you put together and sent me a link to via Facebook. The link was corrupt, and my browser told me it was malicious. So if you wouldn't mind sending that to me a second time, I'll take a look at it. And thank you for following along with us as we do our Crisis thing.
On Facebook, someone named Timu.
Oh, yeah, Timo Rutsulainen?
Yeah.
Kind of difficult to pronounce to the American tongue.
Yeah. He said way back when he didn't understand much, he accidentally ordered the Crisis novel, not the comic book. And now having read and enjoyed all things Crisis, he asks, have we read the novel and how does that fit in? Is it any good? And I think we've talked about this before, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's been a little while. I bought and read that while I was doing the thesis again, so it's been nearly 10 years since I've read it. I remember Barry Allen is given a little more time in the spotlight. He's one of the characters that Wolfman focuses on the most. I seem to recall there's a scene set in the afterlife where we get to see Barry and many, many, many trillions of other fictional characters snuffed out by the events of Crisis, kind of in purgatory or in heaven's waiting room, however you want to call it. And those are really the only impressions I've retained of the novel. I remember thinking to myself that it really didn't offer me very much additional help as far as the writing of the thesis went, and I don't think I took more than like one index card's worth of notes from it. So I didn't really... I wasn't all that impressed by it. I think I like the main series a bit better. Wolfman was trying to narrow his scope a little bit, since Crisis is so all over the place, trying to be so all-inclusive and deal with so many characters from so many DC Universe walks of life. He chose to focus instead on a few POV characters and delve into their thoughts and feelings as the multiverse crumbled around them. And for me, I think there's the widescreen portrayal of the cosmic devastation seen in the Crisis series itself was more fun. So, how about you, Peter?
I actually didn't finish it. And to his question about where does it fit, I think it fits best after you have consumed all 12 issues, because as you said, it's kind of Wolfman's way to go back and tell the story in a different way, utilizing the Flash character Barry Allen, and he can bounce around on the important parts, but again, you're getting a different view of the story. Excuse me. So it's better to have an understanding of the 12 issues first, so you're a little more familiar with what's going on. I think it's an interesting question, though, now that I think about it, especially with the Flash TV series. It makes me want to go read it again, and it makes me wonder if they are paying attention even a little bit to that. They're certainly hinting at some things in the Flash TV series, that could or could not be Crisis related. So that could be interesting. It could be interesting. Maybe maybe they could take their lead of the story from a very Flash centric novel.
All right. Any other preliminaries?
One quick one and one maybe a little bit longer one. To the question of who created Dawnstar, there was some discussion on the forum, and Eric Nolan Wethington came in and emphatically said Dawnstar was definitely created by Paul Levitz and Mike Grell, even though Mike Grell did not draw the issue that she first appeared in.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, for rescuing us from our own ignorance, as you so often do.
And then the trivia question that we attempted to bring up last episode, and maybe we talked about the two questions. The first one about who was the artist, who was the preliminary artist, who was going to be the original artist of Crisis before George Perez, and the name that was brought up was Gil Kane, but nobody could find any kind of specific reference or anything that would confirm or deny any of that. Now, I sort of think that's, and even on the forum, they reproduced a couple meanwhile columns from Dick Giordano, which were these columns that he used to do in the 80s in the books. And they think maybe the Gil Kane rumor just came up because he is in the column, but not necessarily for the Crisis information. So that's probably debunked, I would think. And then to the second question of what writer-artist was given the opportunity to write Crisis, the answer was John Byrne, and it was because he has an FAQ, a fact page on his website for questions that he gets a lot, and the question was John Byrne once asked to write Crisis on Infinite Earths? And John Byrne responds, and I'll paraphrase here. He says, sometime in the early 90s, he was asked by Dick Giordano, he was approached to work on something called The History of the DC Universe. It was a 12-issue maxi series, and the first 11 issues would lay out the established DC lore, and then by the end, everything would blow up, and the next month, the DC books would restart. Mm-hmm. And he says, I was having dinner with Dick Giordano, Frank Miller, and Laurie Sutton. When Dick made the offer, Frank was quick to say he would be crazy to accept such a project, so he agreed. He did not. And he said his own history of the DCU was not as extensive at that time, so he passed. And he says the next couple of years, it floated around, mutating until it became Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was a question that he answered back in December of 2004. Do you want to give your thoughts before I give my own, or would you like me to give mine?
You may as well give yours.
Okay, I think this is a load of horse shit. There is no way. There are just too many stories that Wolfman tells, unless this is a pissing contest between the two of them. But there are just too many stories of this spawning from Marv Wolfman's own head from way back when he was a kid. and the whole thing of creating the character of the librarian and coming across a letter in Green Lantern, which he was writing or editing at the time, about the crazy continuity, coming to Dick Giordano and then Jeanette Kahn with Len Wein and talking about the 50th anniversary coming up, or no, talking about wanting to create this thing and then wrapping it up into the 50th.
Yeah, I think the way that fell out was that they'd hired Peter Sanderson to do lots and lots and lots of research on DC's history, and it took longer than they'd expected. So that they were able to appease Jeanette Kahn's impatience by saying, "Hey, we can roll this in with the 50th anniversary if we just give Peter and us a little more time." Yeah. But yeah, I can kind of agree with what you're saying there, Peter, because we know that John Byrne does tend to inflate himself a little bit from time to time, and as you say, there are absolutely far too many stories out there, being told by Wolfman about how this stems from his own childhood imaginings and his experiences on the Green Lantern creative team, and that's all too well established for me to believe that anybody but Marv Wolfman was going to be the writer of this thing from the start. Originally he was supposed to co-write with Len Wein. I might even believe that Wolfman might have co-written this thing with John Byrne, but the idea that Byrne would have been given the keys to the kingdom and allowed to be writer-artist on this project that just had so much of Wolfman invested in it just doesn't ring true.
Yeah, and I have to say the other thing, too, a couple things speak to this. All right, so New Teen Titans issue 21, cover date of July 1982. So we're talking, around May of 1982 that issue was released. There is a Monitor appearance in that issue way back then. Not the Monitor satellite, I should say. Way back, it's colored gray in the issue.
But it is the Monitor's first, quote unquote, appearance, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's clearly the Monitor satellite, and it's the whole thing of a villain calling him or something like that. It's been a while since I've read it, but so that's May of '82. So, if Byrne is saying he was approached in the early '80s, I can't imagine. I don't know. It just seems like Wolfman was already getting a bead on this idea, by this point. How early in the early 80s does that have to be?
Yeah, really. And Byrne had barely established himself as a writer-artist at that time. I mean, he's as an artist, sure, but writing? I mean, he'd only been writing Fantastic Four for, maybe a year as of 1982.
And who knows? Maybe Dick Giordano did along the way just kind of, while this was going on, maybe he was covering his bases or something like that. But so while maybe there is a grain of truth to it, I can't believe he was the first person that this went through. This was, if anything, maybe Wolfman came, the whole idea was going to be laid out and they were going to talk, maybe they weren't necessarily talking about the creative team just yet, but here's this idea and let them work on it, let Peter Sanderson work on it, and maybe Dick Giordano was just hedging his bets and going around and seeing if there was interest. I sort of want to take this with a real tiny grain of salt. So there you go.
All right. So, well, thanks for those, for contributing those snippets of Crisis lore there. And I think it's is it Derek Wilk we have to thank for those questions? Yes, I can see here that it is.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, and I don't mean to come down so hard on. I'm certainly not coming down on Derek Wilk and
no.
8 who provided the information. I'm too close to Crisis to think that it came from anybody else but the Wolfman.
Yeah, let's not mess with the origin myths.
While we mess with the origin myths,
can only lead to disaster. We must not behold the cosmic hand.
That's right. See? Oh, that's funny. All right, we're going to go to issue 2, and I emailed you about this idea. Did we ever really like sort of say what we thought about issue 1 outside of the footnote stuff? I know that's not necessarily our goal, but I didn't know if you had anything.
I don't think we did any initial general impressions of issue number 1. At this point, I don't know that we really need to go into it, since I think after talking about that first issue at such length, I think at this point people probably already know in a general and specific way what we thought of the issue.
Yeah, it blew our minds. I mean, come on. I mean, it certainly blew my mind, you know. And now we're able to maybe think a little bit more clearly, because now we're like, oh, wow, we're in this series now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've gotten our hands dirty.
Yeah. All right, that's good enough.
Well, do you want to do an initial impressions of issue 2, though?
Sure, we can do that. You want to kick us off on that?
Oh, sure. Well, actually, I was a lot less impressed by issue 2 than I was by issue 1. I am less impressed and have been, since the initial read through many years ago by the second and third issue of the series. They've always struck me as kind of the least interesting and least cohesive of the issues of the series, and which is not to say that I dislike them by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I love the entire series, but it's just that I didn't. I feel like these couple of issues 2 and 3, once the summoning has taken place, all the Monitor's agents are together on the satellite, and he has to send them out to just protect these giant towers that he's built. It just seems like this phase of the story, it strikes me as just kind of like busy work that Wolfman has assigned to these characters to give them something to do while he, sets up and establishes this, that, and the other thing. And it's like the plot hasn't quite quickened yet, both in the sense of acceleration and also the sense of, thickening, gelling, solidifying. So yeah, it just kind of feels like the characters are, they're running around performing this little chore that the Monitor has assigned them to, keep the remaining universes intact for as long as they can. And it feels to me like the story hasn't quite found its legs and gotten off the ground yet in issues number 2 and 3. It's when the major death of issue number 4 is when things really. Yeah, that's when we come to what I call in my thesis the end of the first movement of Crisis. At the climax of issue 4. But issues 2 and 3, we're still kind of in. We haven't quite gotten off the ground yet with the story.
Yeah, so much world building, in a series that's going to world destroy. There's a lot that Wolfman has to kind of touch on, whether it's just to showcase all the different timelines and the Earths of the, or I should say, not timelines, but time periods of the DC universe, to show just how much of their publishing history is going to be involved in all this, all while telling the major Crisis story. Because you're right, it kind of it dips in and out, right? You go from this scene to that scene. Okay, now we're back to the Monitor, and then we're back here. Let's show how this affects this part of the DC universe. And I mean, there's a, not to jump too far ahead, but as I read onward, I almost feel like the story there's nothing proactive done until almost issue 7. We'll get there when we get there, but
until then, the heroes are all kind of back on their heels.
Yeah, and some of it, I wonder. I also wonder if some of it is just, as good as a writer as Marv Wolfman is, as good of a storyteller, the collaboration between him and Perez, they're such great storytellers. They're I don't want to say they're inventing the wheel, but they are building on something that was very high profile, was risky, and I have to imagine was something where there were a ton of cooks trying to get their fingers in it, and it wasn't like they were just going to let them go. So it makes you wonder if even from these early issues, did they say, okay, look, let's try this. Oh, don't forget to put this person in. Oh, don't forget. I remember Perez when they were doing the JLA Avengers miniseries, talking about how at one point he finally just had to say, look, if you change another character's costume, I am done. I'm not going to redo these pages, right? We're just going to set it, and this is what they are. Because I think at one point Kyle Rayner had he got that Jim Lee designed costume. And
with the spiky haircut and the non-crab mask.
Yeah, and he had to draw that in. He had to erase and draw in that thing, and he finally said, okay, that's it. I'm done. You can't give me any more changes, And think about how high profile that was, and that's coming from 2 different companies, not just one. So
Perez
I wonder,
is usually a pretty easygoing guy, too. If
Yeah.
anything, he usually volunteers to draw more stuff, but wow,
Yeah.
he must have been really put upon to have issued an ultimatum like that.
So I wonder if some of that also speaks to just maybe Wolfman, just sort of taking his time and kind of going, all right, I really got to cover a lot here. We have 12 issues. When you really do look at the plot of the overall 12 issues, it probably didn't need to be told in 12 issues, but the scope of everything that they wanted to show does require that many issues and that many pages. So I get that. And I even saw somewhere in one of the many crisis analysis, going on all over the place, that I wish I could remember who it was, but they almost look at every 2 issues as being sort of uniform, and you could almost look at it as a 6-issue miniseries if you combine issue 1 and 2, and then issue 3 and 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, so on. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at the series overall.
Interesting and pretty valid, too, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trying to think what I thought when I first read this way back. I definitely really dug, you get the little Legion of Superheroes thing. They were always a favorite. If I did have the Who's Who by this point, which I think I did, I might have known who Anthro was, but certainly not from a comic book. Commandy I knew from a DC Comics Presents issue. Arion I was reading, so I kind of, of course he was in the first issue, but I think I just was kind of blown away by it, seeing all these people together, just in these strange worlds and going, what? That shouldn't, wow, that's just awesome. Or seeing, when we get to the Flash scene and the rumors of what was going to go with that. And so, analytically, reading it now, what do I think of it? I don't know if I can answer that. It's my own question. I don't know if I can answer it because I think I'm just too immersed in it, Yeah,
it's a good place to be, though.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to make it seem as though there's nothing of merit in these couple of issues. There are a couple of very, very interesting scenes, but just taken, in contrasting it to the work as a whole, it's one of the passages in the story that almost could have been omitted, I think.
As a standalone chapter, if we wanted to look at it like that, issue 1 works as a standalone chapter because it has a very strong beginning, middle, end. Whereas so does this, but you need the first issue to sort of understand what's going on. And then you go to something like issue 7, which kind of works on its own. Issue 8, which is the last one I've just read recently, has pretty much, again, you need some prior knowledge, but it's kind of its own story. This one, this is a tough issue to just say. If you came in to Crisis on issue 2, oh boy, I mean that's a lot of information you're not getting. I think you're being told, but it's not being as explained or shown as it was in issue 1. So I guess there's that.
Yeah, but then again, who starts reading anything with the second issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, on further reflection, it does kind of remind me of it feels more like one of the old Crisis on Earth blank stories that we used to get from the JLA JSA team ups. It's just a bunch of characters thrown together for some cosmic purpose: defeat threat X, defend strategic point Y. So there's this mission that everybody has to defend the vibratory towers. The giant circuit-plated tuning forks that pop up in different parts of DC, past, present, and future, different Earths. It kind of feels like the sort of missions that JLA and JSA members would be parceled off into teams, away teams to perform.
The only thing missing are their individual logos on each chapter.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
and a bunch of headshots framing the cover issue, the image.
All right. You want to jump in?
Okay. Anything to say about the cover before we get started?
It's definitely a cover that's reflective of what's going to happen, of a scene inside the book, even though there are some liberties to it. We see 7 of what I have in my notes of the Great 15, the first 15 characters that were brought before the Monitor and the Summoning, with a new character, Commandy. And this is clearly Commandy's timeline, because you can see the destroyed New York and Statue of Liberty in the background, Commandy being a Jack Kirby character. So, sort of an iconic DC locale at this point. And of the Great 17 on the cover, the only ones that will actually play into the scene are Superman of Earth 2, Dawnstar, and King Solovar. Right, yeah.
Yeah, because Obsidian is with Arion in Atlantis, and we don't know yet, as of this issue, where Firestorm and John Stewart have ended up.
Right. Or Firebrand, yeah. Yeah.
And it's this, and again, I'm being pretty hard on issues 2 and 3 here, but the cover images are the 2 least memorable and least iconic for me of the entire series. Yeah, it's just as you said. It represents a scene that actually happens inside the issue, which is some truth in advertising, I guess. So it's respectable for that reason. But it's just, to me, it's not that exciting. It's not that well laid out. It's just a big looming shadow demon and a bunch of super guys swarming around him. And
probably the biggest takeaway on the cover, again, I know you said people wouldn't start with issue 2, but just in case if they were like asleep the first month the first issue came out, to go look at the cover and go, oh, look, there's Firestorm. Oh, wait, with Firebrand and Dawnstar? What? And I don't know about your cover, but the Earth 2 Superman is not strongly recognizable. He has like one temple that is white, but it looks almost like an accident.
Yeah, it's the same on mine.
Yeah, and the S is not truly visible, so you can look and go, yeah, that is the Earth 2 design, but you got to really look at it. Green Lantern, John Stewart as Green Lantern on the cover, instead of Hal Jordan. So, yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not iconic. It's certainly, it's not one that I would use as a definitive cover for this series. I like the blurb from Anthro to Legion of Superheroes and Beyond. That's kind of interesting.
Yep, promising you right there the full range of the history of the DC universe, past to future.
Yeah. And it's very Perez, the cover, from the perspective to the heavy inks. I always appreciated when he inked himself. And look at the muscle structure on John Stewart. That's so very Perez. You would see something like that on like Nightwing's costume. The rib cage, the way Firestorm's sleeves are very billowy and inked. The detail of Dawnstar's wings, exactly which character is which. The technology of the tuning fork, a lot of Perez elements in here.
Looking at the cover logo right now, Notice how the chain of Earths in the background there, behind the word crisis, it extends from one edge of the cover to the other. It's not just limited to the interior of the lettering itself. It just goes all the way across.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't happen on every cover.
Okay, cool.
All right, ready to crack it open?
Sounds good.
All right. Here we are, 40 minutes in, and it's time for page 1. All right, we begin, fittingly enough, I guess, the dawn of man, so the caption tells us. So this is, we find Anthro here, the first, as his own series building, like the first Cro-Magnon man, the first identifiably human boy born on Earth 1 in the DC universe. His parents were Neanderthals. His father's name was actually Neon, pretty obviously derived from Neanderthal. And so he's kind of like a counterculture hero here. He's the rise of a new generation, a new species on Earth, this Anthro kid. And so we find him in the middle of a fairly typical adventure for him. And Peter, I think when you mentioned earlier, you might or might not have known who Anthro was the first time you picked up this issue. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that I had read Who's Who in the DC Universe #1. I'd found it at a used bookstore in Stone Harbor, and I had read at least the first issue. So thanks to that, I was familiar with Anthro and Arion the Immortal. Mm-hmm. So that's a couple of question marks inked in there for me, at least. So I did have an idea who Anthro was. Anthro, the cave boy. His adventures at the dawn of time. So in this first couple of pages here, we see, what's, as I said, a fairly typical story for Anthro, who first appeared in Showcase back in 1969, I think, and had his own series of adventures briefly. Hadn't been seen since I think he was in Showcase number 100, which was in the late 70s and featured most major characters who had debuted in the pages of Showcase over the years. But here he is back again. He's brought a supporting cast with him. His father, Chief Neon, his mate, Embra, his crippled little brother, Lart, and the entire bear tribe. And here we see Anthro in the middle of attempting to capture a herd of woolly mammoths, or serpent noses as he calls them. And he manages to just barely divert them away from the rest of his tribesmen as they're about to trample them under. He diverts them away. On the bottom of page 2, we see Embra, his love interest, his paramour, cheering him on, looking extremely Valley Girl in that shot. It is 1985, let us not forget. She is pregnant, so Anthro is, the first boy on Earth has now fathered the second generation of Cro-Magnons, of human beings. But then he hits his head on a tree branch on the top of page 3 as he's diverting this herd. And when he comes to, he sees an impossible apparition, something that beggars description. It's this big futuristic metropolis, quite literally metropolis, I think the city of Metropolis, as it will exist on 30th century Earth, many thousands of years into the future. He turns back to inform his tribe of what he's seen, and they all come up to him, poor little Lart hobbling along on his crutch. And suddenly the futuristic, the village, as Anthro calls it, the giant village has disappeared. Embra ministers to his head wound. And so the whole thing is kind of written off as a hallucination on Anthro's part. And then that's that for Anthro. Exit stage left. That's his contribution to this issue. So we're opening here with Anthro, the first boy on Earth. And at this point, I'm going to verge off a little bit here. Peter, did you read the Crisis Mail page at the back of the issue?
I'm pretty sure I did. What did you pull from it?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to throw out this episode's Crisis Fun Fact right now, and it comes from the letters page at the back of issue number 2. Crisis was, in a sense, born in Philadelphia.
Oh.
As we were talking before we started recording about Philly folklore, Peter was telling me he went to a staged reading of a new musical that's in development right now based on an episode in Philadelphia history. And so here's another episode in Philadelphia history for you. You mentioned earlier, Peter, how Wolfman has often gone on record saying that he first conceived the idea of doing some big story to simplify DC continuity after he got that fateful letter to the Green Lantern letter column. And he just kind of allowed that idea to lodge itself in his brain and slowly produce an infection that spread throughout his entire mind and obsessed him in a short period of time. And shortly after that, he tells the story about how he and Len Wein and Joe Staton were all going to a convention in Philadelphia together. They all met up at Penn Station in New York and took the train down and spent a weekend at this convention. And they spent just about the whole time, just Marv and Len, filling each other's heads with ideas about what this, how this project that they'd conceived might come about. And it was the very next Monday morning that the two of them marched into Dick Giordano's office to make their first pitch for what they were then calling the history of the DC Universe, and eventually became Crisis.
Well, look at that.
There you go. Little Philly folklore for you.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to look up Green Lantern 143 was the issue he mentioned, right?
Yep.
And that has a cover date of August 1981, so we're looking at July 1981.
So that's how far back we go.
At least July. Well, if the issue hit July 1981, he probably was due, or I should say June of 1981. If we go with like a 2-month out for the cover date, which is usually standard now. I don't know what it was back then.
Closer to 3, I think.
Yeah.
Because Crisis number 1 was cover dated April, and as we've established, it came out like last week of December, first week of January.
Okay. So let's say May. If he's writing a letter column, which is probably the last thing to come, I mean, we're talking maybe almost February, April of 1981, before it goes into production.
Right.
So it's pushing it even further into the 80s, or early 80s. So there you go. More proof for the John Byrne thing. Anyway, sorry.
All right. And then, so after the Philadelphia convention and these two brainstorming together, Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, they went to make their pitch to Giordano, and Marv announces the title as The History of the DC Universe, and this is all coming from this text piece that Wolfman himself wrote for the back of issue number 2 here of Crisis. And then Wolfman says that Len Wein interjects, "We start the history of the DC Universe with Anthro, the first boy, and end with Kamandi, the last. Actually, we go further, but you know what we mean." So there you go. I mean, this is interesting for one thing. This is almost exactly the sort of structural conceit that Grant Morrison had in mind for his final Crisis series a little while ago. For a while, he was talking about how he wanted it to begin with Anthro and end with Kamandi. And similar to Crisis on Infinite Earths, Final Crisis didn't quite end up following that structural pattern. He did end up putting both Anthro and Kamandi into it, as Wein and Wolfman also did with Crisis, this issue in particular. But it didn't quite work out in such a way that it began literally with Anthro and ended with Kamandi. So looking at this issue... go ahead, Peter.
It did. Final Crisis 1 does open with Anthro and Metron.
But did it end with Kamandi, though?
No, that I don't believe it did.
Yeah, you see, I think in that same scene, Anthro and Kamandi end up meeting each other. Mm-hmm. I think I remember that, but I think it ended up ending with Nix Uotan,
right?
The Monitor, awaking to his new life in the DC Universe.
It just was interesting that both of the, that was one of the things in my notes about this opening scene, to sort of compare it to the scene of Final Crisis, where Anthro in Final Crisis is, I don't even think he gets dialogue. He gets maybe some. If there's any word balloons, which I don't remember, they're more like symbols more than anything. But he almost feels more Cro-Magnon than I think what we're getting here. But so I just thought that was an interesting parallel there.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
but knowing what we now know, thanks to the little text piece, editorial, whatever you want to call it, from Wolfman at the end of this issue, that there was some thought originally, when this was still supposed to be the history of the DC universe as opposed to Crisis on Infinite Earths. They wanted to start it off somehow with Anthro. So one can imagine that at one point in the life of this project, this scene here with Anthro and his tribe and the Serpent Noses, maybe this was supposed to be the first scene in issue 1. And instead it's become the first scene in the second issue. As we link, as the cover blurb proclaims, we go directly from Anthro to the Legion of Superheroes, linking the distant past to the distant future, all in just a few pages.
God, and who knew that? I mean, I'm sure some people did know, but Anthro had a 6-issue series, and I'm looking at the last cover where it says "The Marriage of Anthro," and it's a blonde, which is Embra, and a black-haired girl fighting. It almost looks like something out of Archie comics, Betty and Veronica.
Yeah, or Lois Lane versus Lana Lang.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's hysterical. I mean, the character himself is kind of funny. Like I really almost kind of would love to read an issue of one of these these Anthro stories by Howard Post, who both wrote and penciled and inked and did the cover, for all these issues. It looks like, with editor of Joe Orlando. What kind of character was he? Is he just taking the mold of the 60s young boy? Was he any different from Prez? Was he any different from the Green Team? Was he any different from, you name it? He's just set in a different time period.
Yeah. Binky and his buddies by way of the Flintstones. And
looking at the cover issue of issue 4, his brother still has that, has that crutch. I guess he must be lame more than anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's a temporary injury.
Oh, okay. And the one thing I really liked about this scene, not knowing of any of the stories prior to this, is okay. So Marv Wolfman wants to, and company, they want to showcase the breadth of the DC universe, right? And if anybody read those stories, great. If they didn't, they're probably like, well, who's this character? But it's not only about the stories, but it almost feels like, if that issue number 6 is the marriage of Anthro, is this the first time we're seeing a pregnant Embra? Are they actually developing the story, like pushing the story from when last we saw them?
Right. So whatever happened to Anthro,
Yeah. Which I think is interesting, and I want to say, he does that a few more times too. But I dug that. It's not just showcasing the characters, but going, look, here's where when you think about Anthro being the first boy, if he's older than all these other characters, I have to assume Embra is also a Cro-Magnon. She was just born after him. So is she like the first girl? Is his baby? Well, but her father is Neon, right?
Oh, no, Anthro's father is Neon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Your son. Yeah. So she clearly looks Cro-Magnon. So, their boy is the first, or girl, their child. Is that going to be the first authentic Cro-Magnon baby, whereas Anthro is born from a Neanderthal. The whole thing is just interesting to me. I want the family tree of all this all of a sudden. It's, it's like finding the, what was that historical thing? The, where we could all draw a line all the way back to that young woman they found in Africa or somewhere, something like that.
Oh, well, was she the one they called Lucy?
I think they also kind of touch on it on Battlestar Galactica too. The whole something Eve or something like that. I don't remember. Can every member of the DC universe date themselves all the way back to Anthro and Embra's baby?
Interesting thought.
Right? So I like that. I like that they push. If that is true, if this is the first time we're seeing her pregnant, I like that. I like that little push of continuity there.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to bet this is the first time we're seeing her pregnant, because I think this is Embra's first appearance since, that Marriage of Anthro issue you were talking about, which was the last issue of Anthro's, short-lived 6-issue series back in 1969.
So what do we make of the appearance of Metropolis here? Now, this is if issue 1 showed us the cloud, which we'll come to know as the antimatter cloud, if it hasn't already been named, I don't remember. We're not seeing a cloud, we're seeing a time distortion. So what do we make of that in the terms of what is happening on all these Earths?
Well, early symptom of the crisis effect, I guess. Although we don't really see much more in the way of chronal distortions like that until I want to say after everything has been all the planets have been taken away to the Netherverse, like at the end of issue 4.
Right, when they put the first 3 in and connect the first 3, that's where we get the time displacement. So I thought that was interesting that we're getting that now. And is it just a random blip? I guess the other thing we can sort of say, well, no, I guess we can't say that. I was going to say, since this is Anthro we're talking about, could it just be a scene that's we're reading about now but happens way later in all the crisis event? But that's not true, because we're coming up on the Legion of Superheroes, and they definitely have a timeline that they're following in all of this too. So I just thought it was interesting that we're getting a time distortion as opposed to
this early on, right?
Yeah,
it's just a cool way to make good on the promise of the cover blurb, from Anthro to the Legion of Superheroes, literally.
I had a couple more notes if you want me to keep going here.
Sure, by all means.
Okay.
Just exhaust them.
I love the way that Perez, the panel borders are all craggly and out of proportion and thick lines, and because we are talking about caveman time.
Absolutely, I hadn't even noticed that. Good call, Peter. Stone Age panel borders.
Yeah, and some, some of this stuff you got to let go. It is a comic book, but if he's a Cro-Magnon and his father's a Neanderthal, how are they speaking to each other, or what are they speaking? Like, are we just, because we're not getting any translation brackets? You have to assume they're grunting a lot, and Wolfman is just letting us in on it all.
Yeah. Which is probably why, as you said, Anthro didn't really have much in the way of dialogue in Final Crisis, because Morrison's being, I guess, a tad more realistic about it. But this is more indicative, I think, of the kind of dialogue that Anthro had traditionally gotten. Well, Anthro and his supporting cast had gotten in their own series.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing. So the mammoths disappear, and then they show up. We're going to talk about it real soon in the next scene in the Legion of Superheroes time in Metropolis. You can sort of make the connection that, you can and you can't. I know there are ways around it, but I just think it's fun to think that the Bear Tribe is placed somewhere where Metropolis will be in the future. Now, in the future, Metropolis is meant to be huge. It's meant to almost encompass the entire Northeast, I think they talk about. Like, it just has expanded and expanded and expanded, so I'm sure Metropolis sucks up Philadelphia, and it probably sucks up Boston and all that stuff, So I thought that was interesting. So the Bear Tribe goes to Metropolis, because the next time we see the Bear Tribe, and I know I'm jumping ahead, when the Earths are kind of partially merged, the Bear Tribe place is smack on Wayne Manor.
Right. A real cave pops up in front of the Bat Cave.
Oh, which I didn't even think of that. That's awesome. Yeah. So in my notes, I wrote, okay, so what are we supposed to make of that? Is does that mean there's continental shift, and so that by the present tense, 1985, it's smack on Gotham, but by the future, the plates shift, or maybe it is because Metropolis sucked up Gotham by that time too, so
more than possible.
Yeah. So just a little thing, artistic continuity that they're throwing in. So I thought that was a fun thing to point out.
Yeah, sure.
Outside of that, everything that you just said about showing the first boy of the DC universe, there wasn't much more that because there's a little levity to this first 3 pages, which we weren't getting a lot of in the first issue, outside of Killer Frost being in love with Firestorm. So maybe it was good that they opened it up and they said let's just ease him in before we tear him down.
Yeah. Which is on a similar note, it's. I was going to mention how it's a good thing that they started with a mere 15 characters as sort of a limited representative microcosm of the vast panoptic, multi-hundred cast of characters this book is ultimately going to consist of. So in a couple of different ways where we're kind of starting small here.
Yeah.
Just building to a crescendo.
All right. You want to go to the next scene?
Sure.
You're on the better mic, so I thought maybe it's best that you... Unless there's one that I really want to do, then I'll do that one.
All right, and I'll gladly tag out if you want to do that anytime.
Okay.
All right, so then page 4, the narration tells us the distant past fades to the 30th century. And we join a group of the Legion of Superheroes. We've got Lightning Lass, Colossal Boy, Phantom Girl, Wildfire, and Chameleon Boy. And they are sweeping that self-same giant village that Anthro and his, but just Anthro really saw as he was falling off the back of a woolly mammoth. And they are all scouring the megalopolis of Metropolis, trying to find their missing teammate, Dawnstar. They don't know where she's gotten to, but we, the readers, know, of course. She's got other adventures going on elsewhere. But they're in communication with Brainiac 5, who alerts this team of Legionnaires to a disturbance at Plaza Square. And they show up on the scene. A couple of science police officers are already there dealing with that herd of serpent noses that Anthro misplaced in the first scene. And a couple of the officers are named Sid and Freddy. And Freddy is saying to Sid, "Holy Christmas, what in blazes are those things?" Because that's exactly how police officers of the 30th century would talk to one another, I'm sure. And it's a stampede of woolly mammoths. Other science police officers are on hand. They're armed to the teeth, but Phantom Girl shows up just in time to wave them off. They're going to try to take the sympathetic approach here, do the humane thing, and try and divert the herd of mammoths away without actually harming them. So a little Legion teamwork goes on. Ayla Rand's Lightning Lass sends a lightning blast down to startle the mammoths and send them off in a different direction. Then Chameleon Boy, at the bottom of page 5, shapeshifts into a woolly mammoth. And I didn't pick up at first on the fact that he had turned into a mammoth the first time I read this. And I also didn't pick up on it at first this most recent time I read it. I assumed that those word balloons were coming from a character who was riding on like the lead mammoth, but you got to look carefully for the little motion lines, those little vibration lines that Perez drew around Chameleon Boy as mammoth to show that he had just shape changed. So Reapdaggle as a mammoth leads the rest of the herd away. Colossal Boy is on hand to corral them, but just as he's about to take them in hand, after growing to gigantic size, the mammoths all vanish, leaving a bunch of very confused Legionnaires and science police officers in their wake. But they don't get much of a chance to muse on the subject because at the top of page 6, you've already got Brainiac 5 telling them that they need to forget the mammoths and even forget their missing teammate for the time being because another threat has just shown up on his instruments that dwarfs even those problems. He says his computers are detecting high-intensity frequency waves on the alpha-omega scale. He says that there's antimatter energy moving toward the Earth from points unknown, and it's enough energy to destroy not only Earth, but the entire universe. So the Legion is now aware, has caught their first inkling that something is coming that threatens Earth-1. So,
yeah, go ahead.
There's your Legion content, Peter, brief though it is.
Yeah, it was nice. It's a nice little touch throwback to issue 1. They're looking for Dawnstar. Legion is a popular book at this point in the 80s. To go back to the cover blurb, as you mentioned, they're making good quite early on that blurb and showing them, and it's a nice way to show the crazy time distortion things that are going on. And without having, because obviously this early in the story, he can't already have antimatter starting to destroy Earth 1 and 2. It's too early, although I guess by the time we get to the last pages, maybe it's not. So he has to show other ways of alerting these different people that something is crazy is going on. And past meets future, I should say. And Perez gets to counter, juxtapose what he just went through with very nature and animals and naked bodies and loincloths and big eyes. He's always wanted to show big eyes as innocence. And now we have technology and gleaming cities and science police and aliens and powers, costumes, all different crazy costumes. So, it's kind of a cool 1-2 punch. What'd you make of any of this?
Well, it's just a really, really quick, like 2 1/3 page action sequence here, just to again make good on the promise of the front cover. Really show the past and the future in the DC universe, and foreshadow the fact that people in the future. Well, it's not by a long shot the furthest forward future zone in the DC Universe timeline. I mean, you've got Abracadabra coming from the 64th century. You've got the Lord of Time all the way out in like the year 1 million AD or whenever he's supposed to come from. But it's thought of, when you think of the future in the DC Universe, the Legion and the 30th century, or 31st nowadays, is the first thing you think of typically. So it must have been known from the start that they would have to play a very large part in this series, and so Wolfman's just kind of taking a couple of pages to establish the role that they will eventually play a little later on. And so Brainiac 5, the reader can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief here now, knowing that his Brainiac 5 and his 12th level intellect is aware of the problem and will be working on it. And speaking of Brainiac 5, if you look at that one panel with him in it on page 4, in the
Looks
back,
like you.
Yeah, I guess. I've always thought I looked a little more like Element Lad than like Brainiac 5.
Okay.
But yeah, I sort of relate to him at times when he's not being a total,
just say it,
prick.
Yeah.
But on the screen behind him to the left, you can kind of see the outline of 2 circular bodies parallel to one another. So is he looking at the collision or early stages of merging of parallel Earths already, making projections of what's going to happen?
I mean, he says universe and not like multiverse, so I sort of thought, does he really know the scope just yet? But I didn't notice that before, and I tried as much as I could. I tried to make out that interlac because there's plenty of. At one point, I actually knew I could read interlac because I'm a nerd. But I pulled up, a key, and it's just too tiny and not clear enough and not big enough. Maybe I need to look at like the absolute and see if it's like a bigger image of that. And it's also backwards.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe you have to hold it up to a mirror on top of everything else.
So that I tried though. I tried to make it out, and I just couldn't. It doesn't make any sense.
We appreciate your sacrifice, Peter.
Yes, yeah. To speak about what you said about the future, and I guess in terms of DC, is this the farthest we go in the future where there are heroes? You know, Abracadabra being a villain, the Lord of Time. There's also the Time Trapper, who's supposedly at the end of time.
Uh-huh.
So do we know of anybody that's at this point in 1985? I don't know if I know any other ones.
I'm trying to remember how far in the future. Do you remember those stories when Hal Jordan used to be kidnapped to the future and brainwashed into thinking that he's like a senator named Paul Manning, because that era lacked its own hero, so they had to steal one from the 20th century to come, fight their battles for them. And I'm trying to remember which century that was.
I am looking it up as you speak. The challenge from 5700 AD, excuse me, late 58th century.
All right, so there you go. But they didn't have any superheroes in that era, so they had to recruit from the 20th century. So maybe you're right, people. Maybe the 30th century is like the furthest forward outpost of mass superheroics. And gradually, granted that the 20th century is kind of a hotbed of superhero activity, but I guess this is kind of a superhero renaissance going on, a millennium to the future.
And it's certainly important in the grand scheme of things in terms of if they're already thinking about the craziness of the DC universe in terms of the timeline. You already have so many different futures. Where does the Great Disaster fit in with, say, the sci-fi stories of the 50s and 60s?
Yes, this is a question Wolfman is clearly asking himself, as we'll see when we get to that scene.
Yeah, and where does and it's been shown the Legion is sort of far off enough that you can make up anything, but once they start having conversations by the end of all of this, and it becomes something of a sticking point too, of like, when they revamp Superman and they give up the whole Superboy years, he no longer is a Superboy that we know him as. Well then how does that, you sort of, at this point you could kind of go, oh, the Legion of Superheroes, they'll be okay because whatever happens, how many thousands, whatever happens in our time period, it's long enough that nothing's going to affect it. Well, you suddenly, in the Crisis, you get rid of Superboy, you get rid of Supergirl, and technically they're not going to exist at the end of all this. Well, you know what? Yeah, it does make a big difference. And that's something they would play with for years. And and it would just get more and more frustrating as it goes.
Yes.
So
every Band-Aid they attempt to put on the problem just causes a new rash to break out.
And for anybody who is familiar with the Legion of Superheroes, there is a female science police. They're called Science Police in the future. Right there on the bottom panel on page 4, and she's also on the bottom panel on page 5. She's lifting up her visor on the bottom panel of page 5. She's clearly a female. Most likely, that's probably Siobhan Aaron. Who was a character within the Legion of Superheroes. She was a on and off again girlfriend of Element Lad that you mentioned, and she was a captain or something like that. And she's definitely a supporting character in the Legion of Superheroes books. So it's either her or there's a small possibility it could also be Gigi Cusimano, but Gigi usually has a little mark on her chin, and the panel is too small for Harris to draw that, or for us to make it, or for us to even see if that is her. So, but I'm pretty much going with Siobhan Aaron.
Yeah, well, there is another Science Police woman there, just underneath the arm of the one who's lifting her visor and speaking. So maybe that's Gigi Cusimano.
Yeah, it could be. And I also really like that it was Phantom Girl. She's one of my favorite Legionnaires. I love Phantom Girl. She's one of her and Triplicate Girl are usually the longest, the members with the longest
relationships.
History. Yeah. she's like outside of the big three, you know, Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl and Cosmic Boy. Then it goes to Triplicate Girl and Phantom Girl, you know. So they've been Legionnaires the longest, and I really dig her character.
One of the first Legionnaires to really establish a steady relationship with a fellow Legionnaire, too. Ultra Boy. I love the pigtails.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's a good little scene. It gets them into this. You know, we'll see them. They come in on and off throughout this series. So, nice little. And there, as we transition to, unless you have something else,
well, since we're talking about Legionnaire relationships, I might as well mention that the guy in the red suit with the visor over his face, he's called Wildfire. And he and Dawnstar kind of had a thing going with each other. So if you see his dialogue, if you sense a note of urgency in his voice, he's the one who seems the most anxious to get this mammoth thing wrapped up so they can get back on Dawnstar's trail before they lose it. That's because he's attached to Dawnstar romantically, and so he's everybody's anxious to find her again since she's missing, but there's a little extra edge to him as far as finding Dawnstar again.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's just ironic that they are trying to track the tracker and having no luck.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. What I was going to say about the next scene, the transition to the next scene where it says the future fades now to present, late July 1985, you can see how the future Earth, although it kind of looks like a baseball or basketball looking design there, that's the polymer screen, the plastiscreen that is around the Earth. We saw it in issue 1 too, that protects the Earth and helps them weather control and all that. So that's how you know, whenever you see that, that's shorthand for 30th century Legion of Superheroes Earth 1.
Gotcha. All right, so the future, from the plastiscreened Earth 1 of the future, fades now to the present, late July 1985. So we've seen the past, we've seen the future, now to the present, and but it's still not quite the present because technically, this. If we're going by the DC checklist on the inside back cover of issue 2, it actually was released on February 7th of 1985. So late July of 85 is technically the future.
Like we talked about that in the first issue, that as a way to allow maybe the other books to catch up or give space. Yeah,
in order to give to provide a cushion for the Crisis series itself. Should it somehow fall behind some kind of established timeline for itself or for other books. So here we are. Earth 1 and the stately mansion of millionaire Harold J. Standish III. Actually, the mansion which now belongs to Mr. Standish's heirs. It's a neat way to word those captions to let us know that Mr. Standish is no longer among the living, because who else but the clown prince of crime, the Joker, has showed up, and he exposits a bit here, and so he's in the middle of a typical Joker scheme. He's murdering this guy to get his hands on the copyrights to silent comedy movies that the late Mr. Standish owned, and then Batman breaks in through the window. He's solved a clue that the Joker has left for him. And the two of them start a battle, just a typical Batman-Joker fist fight, the likes of which they've had dozens of times before. But then something happens a little differently, because in staggers the ghastly specter of the Flash. He's got pink, plumes of pink energy coming off of him. His body language suggests that he's in bad physical condition. He's physically deteriorating. He's exhausted. He's just kind of staggering along, and he's on the brink of death. His word balloons are all jagged, and he's pleading for help from someone. Anyone, please help me. Batman is surprised to see him because, as he thinks to himself, the Flash? But he disappeared. Then, ever the practical one, Batman turns his attention to getting out some solvent from his utility belt to get himself out of the paste that the Joker has sprayed all over him. The Joker actually manifests a little bit of fear, which is kind of unusual for him. He sees the Flash. He stammers a little bit as he whips out his pistol and points it at the Flash and tries to get Batman to back him up. on the fact that the Flash has got no business showing up in the middle of this Batman story, which is true on a couple of levels. The Flash doesn't usually operate in Gotham City, and it's not a matter of convention for dying superheroes, outside of like a team-up book like Brave and the Bold or DC Presents, to just wander into the middle of a standard hero-villain duel like this. But the Joker shakes it off pretty quickly, just fires his gun at the Flash. Batman then knocks it out of his hands with a batarang. Then Batman turns his attention to the Flash, the Joker being disarmed, and the Flash starts stammering about the state of the world. He's raving a little bit. He says, "Please, can't you see the world? It's dying all around me." He cries out for his wife, Iris, calls her by name, and Batman knows from that this is not just some trick or illusion of the Joker's. And and that gentleman, meanwhile, is making a hasty exit, marveling to himself that Batman managed to figure out his riddle. He's just seen the ghost of the Flash before him, and he's it just shows you what a narcissist the Joker is. He's still thinking about how the heck did Batman manage to figure out that Plymouth clue? And Batman, we have a great Perez panel here in profile of Batman and the Flash face to face. Batman wants to know where the Flash is and what's happening to him, offering the Flash help. The Flash is barely aware of where he is and to whom he's speaking. All he just does is keep raving about how the world is dying. Iris, dying, may already be dead. And then finally, save us, save us, save us. And then the image disintegrates. The Flash physically practically turns to dust right there in front of Batman's eyes. And then another uncharacteristic moment of fear. Batman, wide-eyed, looks right out at the viewer. All we can see in this panel is his eyes in silhouette, and he says, "Dear God, what is happening?" Wouldn't we all like to know? And then at the very bottom of the page, we get the credits. It's a little cinematic flourish here. Before we get the big title, we see a couple of introductory screens. We see DC Comics proudly presents, and a little thin bar at the bottom telling us the creative team: Marv Wolfman, ye writer-editor; George Perez, penciler; Dick Giordano, inker; John Costanza, letterer; and Anthony Tollin, colorist. And to get the title of the series and the story, you have to turn the page. So it's just like the rolling of the credits in the opening sequence of a film.
Yeah.
So there's your Batman, Gotham City, Joker sequence, and our first look at our first premonition of the death of the Flash.
Mm-hmm. Such a great sequence.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, it almost puts the lie to what I said earlier about how this issue 2 and issue 3 are, in my opinion, a couple of the weakest of the series. But this is one of the strongest scenes in the whole book.
Yeah. You want to touch on that? You want to keep going with that?
Yeah, well, okay, I will.
Okay.
Well, first of all, let's look at the let's do the nitty gritty first. The footnote there about see the Flash number 350. When Batman notes that the Flash has disappeared and Batman doesn't know what had happened to him, and there's an editorial note saying see the Flash number 350. And at this point, I'm going to defer a bit to Dr. Chuck Coletta, Jack Sir from the forums. He left a post on the talkback thread for our last episode, looking ahead to issue number 2. And he says, younger CGS listeners may have no knowledge of the Flash's trial that's mentioned here in the second issue. I never read this long story by Cary Bates, but I do recall people talking about how interminable it was at the time. I always thought that some fans were ready for Wally to pick up the mantle after the negative reaction to that storyline. I read an interview with Bates online where he discussed that he was told about a year before Crisis that Barry would be killed off. So it was nice of somebody to let him know about that. He also said that if the Crisis hadn't come, Barry would have become a fugitive from justice and eventually joined his own rogues gallery. So and then Chuck provides a link to an interview with Bates at speedforce.org to back all of this up.
Right.
The Flash number 350, another bit of comics time travel going on here because the Flash number 350 hadn't even been published yet.
No. According to my notes, it was only at Flash 345 by this point.
Right. Number 350 wouldn't come out until, cover date October. So, regardless of when this issue hit the stands, February 7th, I'm pretty sure, it would have been 5 months later that people would be able to pick up the Flash number 350 and get the details that this footnote tells them they should be seeking out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that comment because I just pulled up that comment as well. And because I was reading the Flash trial at that point, and he's right. It went on and on and on and on. And I think, I want to say, just sort of like Supergirl too, I think it's hard. I can't be 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain we knew something was going to happen to the Flash. I mean, I think we kind of knew. You know, if that was issue 345 that was also hitting the stands, we only had about 5 more issues. The trial was kind of wrapping up, and there's all this crazy stuff going on. And, you know, is Reverse Flashback, was Abracadabra really the one behind it all? Like, what? There were all these clues. There was this mysterious man that seemed to know so much about him. You know, I want to say that the early buzz, the rumors, even at this point, when I used to hear the quote-unquote adults talk at the comic store, was that Flash wasn't going to make it out of this alive, especially when you see this scene. You know, I think we were all kind of tired of that trial. It did feel a little bit like they were spinning their wheels. So I think he's right. I think they kind of knew. You know, the writing was on the wall, I should say.
Well, I had not known that. That you know, he was in the winds that far in advance of Crisis that Barry Allen was marked for death.
Yeah, and like I said, maybe it's not this early. Maybe it's a few issues later. Maybe it's certainly by the time you read issue 350 and he's reunited with Iris in the future. You know, all this stuff like. I think the narration even says, and they would live happily ever after for a little while. And, you know, which by that point you're kind of like, okay, if you don't know by now, something bad's happening here. Yeah. You know, and also, too, because Wally West is not Kid Flash at this point. I mean, he's just Wally West. He's suffering from his disease that if he runs too fast, you know, the speed is going to kill him. I can pretty much think, let me see if I can quick look up where the Titans are at this point. Yeah, by this point, he's not Kid Flash in the Titans book. You know, they're in their Baxter run by this point. He's just Wally West. So, you know, you got him in limbo. You got this crazy story. You're wondering what's going to come on the other side of this crisis. And I guess people put 2 and 2 together and said, all right, I don't think Barry Allen's coming out of this alive, and Wally will probably take over.
And sure enough.
Yeah. No, not to give spoilers.
Yeah, not to give spoilers, literally.
Now, what do you make of this Flash thing? Like, we know where this is coming from, but you know, if readers don't know, do we want to talk about, you know, what this could be, this little visit, this visit from him?
Oh, you mean as far as flashing? No pun intended. Flashing forward to issue number 8.
Yeah.
Let's just let that one percolate for a while.
Okay, because there's a little. I'll keep it in my notes because there's some discrepancies, I think, on how that gets told, but all right. So
we do see the panel with the Joker pointing the gun at Barry. This is not the last time we will see that image.
Right. Exactly. Right. And you're right. I love that the Joker is shitting bricks because he is the Flash. And you know what? I think Mark Waid told this in the Justice League Year 1 story, where they said there's a lot of case files that are wrapped up fairly quickly because Flash got there first. And, as it should be. It's the Flash. What's a gun going to do to him? Joker should be fearful of this, you know. It's kind of the conceit of comic book, you know, superhero comics, that if half of these heroes would just switch their home base of operations and go fight another Rose Gallery, they probably would wipe him out so just quickly. You know, because they're just either not used to him or, you know, what's Joker really going to do against the Flash? No,
probably at least as well as the Trickster's done against him over the years, I would think.
I do like that panel, though.
Yeah, you can see that. Look at all those vibration lines around the Joker's head. He's shaking like a leaf.
Mm-hmm.
This feels like a good time for a thesis break.
Great. Let's do it.
All right. Yeah, as I said, I don't think that the second and third issues are the most fertile ground for academic exploration in the whole series. But I do have a passage here that kind of relates to the first few scenes that we've been talking about here really can be explained or illuminated a bit by the passage I'm about to read here. Here in the thesis, I just got done making the point about the death of the crime syndicate, symbolizing sort of a rite of passage for the DC universe from a naive, more simpler time when good and evil can be thought of as absolutes that can be separated on either side of a dimensional barrier. So the evil Justice League have died and will now be integrated into the unified universe after Crisis, so that the heroes themselves will all become a bit darker because there's a little bit of Earth 3 in them. Okay, so continuing from that, this same end of innocence agenda is also advanced through strategic manipulation of generic expectations throughout Crisis on Infinite Earths. The fantastic elements of the superhero narrative, in a way, function to symbolically celebrate and elevate the mundane elements, the all-important stati quo of human society. Even the fantastic elements themselves tend to assume a formulaic, repetitive, or predictable everyday character, which can be comforting to readers. Umberto Eco calls this the hunger for redundance, describing it as a potentially beneficial search for release from the unpredictability of real life. Crisis on Infinite Earths, however, makes it a point to deliberately break readers out of the safe, predictable modes of storytelling to which they are accustomed. Numerous scenes in Crisis introduce various characters in the midst of a typical scenario, one that fits reader expectations for that character or genre. E.g., the Blue Beetle foiling kidnappers, Anthro the cave boy capturing a herd of mammoths, cowboy character Bat Lash getting thrown out of a saloon, which we'll see in issue number 3, etc., only to shatter the familiar formula through the jarring, uncanny introduction of some phenomenon connected to the cosmic havoc of the Crisis story, to which the character, and the reader, reacts in shock and awe. This strategy is much like one identified by Paul Ricoeur, another writer I'm quoting in here, as a common feature of folk tales in which the protagonists experience a period of dreamlike archetypal timelessness before the story begins in earnest. As a result, the tale assumes an oniric dimension, oniric meaning dreamlike, that is more or less preserved alongside the heroic dimension of the quest, but that has to be suspended by an act of rupture by which the world of action emerges from the land of dreams, as though the function of the tale is to elicit the progressive time of the quest out of the regressive time of imaginary travel. Crisis on Infinite Earths is full of such acts of rupture, which breach the regressive time of the oniric climate of stagnant superhero storytelling, as expressed in repetitive comic book story formulae, through the motif of repeated surreal disruptions of the generic status quo by mysterious forces. So there you have it. We're moving towards the progressive time of a new unified continuity and a new paradigm of storytelling by just setting these little scenelets that we see here in the beginning of Crisis number 2. You have the Anthro thing, the Legion thing, and now the Batman and the Joker plus Flash thing. We set up these little scenes that are indicative of the kind of stories that these characters have had over and over again over the years, just to introduce them to readers who may not have known who Anthro was or who the Legion were. So they're helpful in that respect. But they also, for readers who maybe know the characters a little better, they create the illusion of business as usual, only to shatter that illusion by having some weird crisis stuff happening that ruptures the usual pattern of the story and lets everyone know that, oh my God, something really earth-shattering is happening here. It's playing with and totally subverting generic formulae and the reader's expectations, and Wolfman goes out of his way to do it multiple times in the course of the story. And I don't think it's ever done any better than in this Batman-Joker duel interrupted by the ghostly dying Flash.
I love that. I have a couple notes that kind of tie into that, and I think to go back to Chuck Coletta's thing where he says the Batman Joker scene was always one of my favorites. It nicely encapsulates their relationship over the decades. Mm-hmm. More importantly, they each display a sense of fear and panic that's not often evident in their characterizations. Mm-hmm. He says, as I reread the series, I'm struck by how much I preferred the superheroes in the pre-grim and gritty era sparked by Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. And the way these characters are presented in this issue, I mean, this is the Joker that Jose Luis Garcia Lopez draws in his licensing book. You know, he has there's a style guide. That's what it is. Mm. You know, the Joker that has the very long jaw, the very big head, the collar, the flower, you know, this is like iconic trademark Joker, you know. Yeah, certainly it's almost Marshall Rogers in a way too, but
good point.
You know, the hat, the color scheme, the constant wide face, the clown, right? You know, this is the symbol on his helicopter, you know, this is the symbol that his henchman wears. I think even in the Tim Burton Batman, I think you see this version I think I'd have to look at it again, but I remember looking at it one time and going, oh my God, it looks just like this version. And think about Batman in this one, you know, like is one thing, you know, where he says, then I'll figure out what new game that capricious clown is playing. I mean, this is a Batman we don't have anymore. He's not going to say that anymore, you know? So that whole thing of what you're saying about like the interrupting, I'm trying to think of like a movie or another comic or something where we're constantly seeing the same scene over and over again, but then by the fifth time we see it, something different happens or somebody interrupts, you know, like, I don't know, maybe in Back to the Future or something like that. You know, I was trying to think of a good example of what you're talking about. And, you know, this is very clear. If this wasn't Crisis, this little duel that they have, Batman would get out of it. He wouldn't get shot, of course, you know, even with the Flash appearance, you know, he would get out of it and he'd stop the Joker and it would be the end of the book and you'd go on to the next thing. But certainly Crisis is an interruption of the DC universe, and so is this little, you know, they're not so innocent anymore, right? The DC universe can't be innocent anymore.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's going to come out of this in a very different way. But I love that these characters, like these are the last times we're going to see this version, right? Like these versions of these characters, you know, until, especially by the end of the issue and by the end, whenever their specific titles flip over to post-Crisis.
Right. I mean, in Batman's case was number 401.
Right. You know, they're gone. Even the way Perez draws Batman here, the way he draws Joker, you know, the big scalloped cape and the color scheme is still highlighted blue, which you can sort of, you know, the idea is that it actually is blue and gray as opposed to black and gray in Batman's suit.
Yeah, which to this day is the color scheme that I prefer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the Batman I grew up on, you know. Mm-hmm. So, I love that observation in your thesis. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter. Yeah. It's the only one I got for this episode.
For the entire issue too?
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I have some other notes here. This is the first of the big three to be seen, at least the Earth 1 versions of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, which, you know what, in the 80s, the Trinity wasn't really a hardcore kind of concept like it would be later. But, you know, we've seen a Superman, but not the Superman. And I don't think we've seen Wonder Woman to this point, so here's Batman.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the world's finest duo was a hardcore concept, certainly. But I don't think they had elevated Wonder Woman to the position of third point on the Trinity just yet.
Yeah. There's some really great Perez things here. Perez always believed that if you're going to destroy something or shatter something, it should look like the debris and the pieces, if you were to put them back together, would actually create 10 times more of what it originally was destroyed. So make it, you know, if you're going to shatter glass, make it so that there's so much glass that if you put it back together again, you would have 3 glasses as opposed to one big giant pane. He was always a fan of do more in your debris. So on the bottom there, page 6, there's
a lot of shards.
A lot of shards of glass, yeah. On page 7, I love this. So in the second panel, Batman has just punched Joker, and Joker's on his ass. And Batman has his cape scalloped all out. And he's creating a shadow. And if you look, the head of the shadow goes all the way down to the corner of the page to actually be part of the word balloon. The thought balloon, where he says, another second and I'll reach the solvent. And it's leading to the shadow.
I see. I'd assume that was just part of his cape, but no, that is the pointy ears of the shadow coming out of the panel at the top of the page. You
can see that shadow just encapsulates the whole background there. And what a great little... it's just a weird connect. It's it's fascinating. I love that little bit of artistry there. Just some really good stuff. And McFarlane used to do some of that kind of work in his early Infinity Inc. days.
Oh, right. He used to do all kinds of weird little doodle things in the gutters.
Yeah.
Yeah, non-diegetic stuff, of course.
Right. You gotta love Batman has, this is the Batman that can pull anything out of his utility belt and usually does. This is the superhero, the Batman as a superhero to me. He's not necessarily the detective. He's not necessarily the brooding post Frank Miller Batman. This is the Batman leading Batman and the Outsiders who constantly pulled gadgets out of his belt. And I remember often saying that when the new Dr. Midnight joined the Jeff Johns JSA series, that version of Dr. Midnight felt the same way, where he had all these gadgets. He was very stoic. He wasn't mean. Batman wasn't mean at this point. He wasn't constantly yelling at people or being distrustful of the Justice League or anything. He was just this Dark Knight. He was a Dark Knight. So this was the version I grew up on. And everything else you touched on, the disintegrating panels, very Perez, very scary, kind of like, whoa, we're not supposed to see heroes do this kind of stuff. They're not supposed to die that way. So that was kind of interesting. And, you want to get a little metatextual, Batman's eyes looking at us, almost like saying, hello, you're reading this. What is going on?
Yeah. Help a Bat brother out here. You can see more of what's going on than I can.
Especially after reading or flipping through the most recent Multiversity Ultra Comics issue. Those eyes, when I saw them again, I was like, whoa, sorry, Batman, I can't help you out. I'm going on. I'm going to turn the page.
Yeah, just don't make eye contact. Yeah. And the panel right above that is the Flash, crumbles away to nothing, disintegrates before Batman's eyes, screaming, "Save us, save us, save us." That's, he's not saying save me, he's saying save us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like shouting to, the readers, whoever's in charge at DC at the time. He's making as I said I wasn't going to read any more for my thesis, but I think I've already decided I've lied. A collective plea made on behalf of the entire soon-to-be-defunct portions of DC continuity. Away he goes. The effect of this unprecedented image of the apparent grisly death of a classic superhero is potent indeed, especially in light of the fact that Batman, well known and admired by superhero fans as a paragon of grim courage, resourcefulness, and self-mastery, a character who does not feel fear but creates it, is shown to be just as afflicted with terror, confusion, and helplessness as the reader presumably is, exclaiming, "Dear God, what is happening?" So that's what Chuck was saying in his post. It's not fear is not usually a part of the characterization of either Batman or the Joker, but they are both clearly unnerved by what's happening here. This is not part of the script.
All right.
On the text side of things, I have one more nitpick about this sequence. On page 6, as the Joker is talking to the dead body of Harold Standish, saying that he fancies himself a movie mogul, Louis B. Mayer. It's spelled M-E-Y-E-R in this word balloon, but it's actually supposed to be M-A-Y-E-R, as in Metro Goldwyn Mayer. And in the collected edition, that has been corrected.
Okay. All right. Shall we go on and actually get to the crisis story? We have time to do that, yeah.
Oh, of course we do. Yeah, all right. So I mentioned at the bottom of page 8, we've got the little introductory credits there, and then the big title splash, pages 9 and 10. So now we are back on board the Monitor satellite. We are picking back up where the end of issue number 1 left off. Crisis on Infinite Earths is at the top of the page. I just love the way those letters are kind of carved out of the top of the top panel on this 2-page splash. And the title of the story is Time and Time Again. There we are, focusing on time again. And I do like that observation of yours, Peter, that we're getting time distortion at this early phase in the story when maybe a little bit ahead of schedule. But anyway, here we are on board the Monitor satellite. The 15 have been gathered, 15 beings with extraordinary abilities, and they have been brought aboard this space and time spanning satellite for reasons they have yet to learn. And they're all spread out in kind of a usual suspects lineup here, all 15 of them. Only a couple of them have dialogue in this panel at the top of the page. Each of them has a little caption reminding readers what all their names are. So there's the mugshots going around the border of the cover we were talking about in those old JLA JSA team-ups. Firestorm gets to speak. He says he's trying to fend off Killer Frost's advances. He's still under the influence of Psycho Pirate's love whammy, and she's hanging all over him, and he's saying, now cut that out. And the only other character who says anything here, interestingly, is Dr. Polaris. He's got magnetic energy pulsing around his hand. He's all primed for attack. He's pointing accusingly at the Monitor and shouting something. He's not famous for tact, is Dr. Polaris anyway. He's a bit of an ego. And he's screaming at the Monitor, you've supplied weapons to other supervillains. He doesn't even give a crap what this guy has to say. He just knows that he's kind of dicked around a bunch of members of the criminal underground, and he is not at all prepared to trust the Monitor in any way. But then the Monitor launches into his spiel. He doesn't have a whole lot of time because, as we'll see in the next couple of pages, he has become physically weakened by what's been going on out there in the multiverse. The tragedies befalling universe after universe as the antimatter wall consumes them. He introduces himself to the heroes and villains assembled. He says he is the Monitor. He summoned you here because your universes are about to die, which is pretty much what he said at the end of issue number 1. Already more than 1,000 universes have perished, so there's something approximating a death toll there, if it can be calculated how many lives are lost with the destruction of one universe, let alone 1,000. Just take that figure and multiply it times 1,000. He breaks the news to the group about what has happened to Earth 3. A couple of them are aware of the existence of Earth 3 and have even been there. And he shows a couple of neat little circular monitor screens there, scenes of devastation from Earths that have already died, including one shot of Power Ring of Earth 3, ever the epitome of tight-lipped courage, just clutching his chin in abject terror. Once again, he's kind of the moral opposite of Green Lantern, so naturally he would be a coward. And he describes what happens when the antimatter force finds its way to a universe. It expands outward, engulfing one universe and then another, destroying all life, all hope. Then he breaks it down into stages. First, your worlds will feel nature's wrath as your planets cry out in agony. Worlds in upheaval, earthquakes, volcanic disturbances, floods, which will crush your coastline cities like so many twigs beneath your feet. Then shall come the nothingness, silent, invisible, sweeping across your worlds and taking with it everything. No mention of time disruptions yet, but we've already seen it happening. Then Firestorm takes his turn to directly accuse the Monitor, bringing up the fact that he's been masquerading as an arms merchant and procurer for various supervillains and criminal figures. And Firestorm wants to know what the deal is with this. And the Monitor, again, he's feeling weaker. He says, "I've come here to help save your worlds, not to fight you. Please, I am tired. But I will try to explain all." So he makes his way to the chair in which he's been sitting, with his back to the reader for so many appearances he's made prior to this. And this time he's going to sit in it facing the reader. Simon has a little outburst. Now here's another example of something that was altered from single issue to collection. This is a panel that they felt the need to recolor because he fires a mental force blast at the Monitor. He attacks the Monitor. But the way that panel is colored here at the bottom of page 9, it's a little hard to tell that he's doing much of anything until you look at the very next panel when you see an energy beam reach the Monitor and he just effortlessly produces a force field to deflect it. Somehow the energy beam turns from a non-distinct orange to green when it gets to the Monitor. So in the collection, the whole thing's recolored pink. And then the heroes and villains start arguing among themselves as to whether the Monitor should be listened to or should not be listened to, trusted or not trusted. There's a quick little exchange between Lila, who has reverted to being Lila from her Harbinger self, inquires if the Monitor is all right because he seems so much weaker than she's ever seen him before. The Monitor kind of dismisses her at that point and says that he's going to need Harbinger to stand by his side to help ride herd over all these yahoos. And Lila then whispers that she will be supportive and she's going to, I guess, walk away and recoup her energy and convert herself back into Harbinger. We'll see her again in another page or two. But she's already wondering to herself why she feels such a strong urge to lash out in violence. Why does she feel hate toward the one who saved her life? Why? So there's the first of several times in this issue when either Harbinger herself or the Monitor or a third-person narrative caption will make mention of the fact that the Monitor rescued Lila when she was a child and raised her as if she were his own. Just foreshadowing the tragic betrayal that will ultimately happen and what will transpire between Harbinger and her adopted father figure, the Monitor. So finally, the hero of the greatest generation, Superman of Earth 2, speaks up and says that the Monitor needs to be heard because, after all, if he's telling the truth, it's in all their best interest because it will help them to save their worlds, and if he's lying, there's no way he can stand up to the combined power of all of them anyway. So, on page 11 then, the Monitor takes the stage. He explains that he's linked with all positive matter, but as more and more universes are destroyed and liquidated and converted to antimatter, the weaker he becomes. And he says that if this group of 15 characters fails in their current mission, he might not have enough strength left. He would be helpless to prevent his foe from destroying everything. And then we have a couple more single-panel shots of the various characters reacting and doubting. And Solivar says what we're all thinking and says, "Monitor, why us? Surely there are others with greater powers. Your story rings false." So again, we've spent a lot of time talking about this in our last couple of episodes. Why this particular group of 15 characters. Extra textually, it's easy enough to understand why Wolfman went with these particular figures. Breakdown of 10 Earth 1 characters to 5 non-Earth 1 characters, 11 heroes to 4 villains, some from the past, some from the future. It's just kind of a representative cross-section of what DC is publishing at the time and the full range of its of all the settings in which DC Comics have taken place over time and space. But it's harder to come up with an in-story justification for why this specific team was put together. And indeed, the Monitor is too weak, quote-unquote, in this issue to really explain to these characters why them. But all the same, they just kind of... John Stewart's Green Lantern Power Ring tells him that the Monitor is being truthful with them. Firebrand of Earth 2 is feeling a little weak and disoriented herself. And so just the characters just kind of chat amongst each other as to whether or not what Monitor is telling them is to be believed. Monitor, to reassure them further, says, "I have tested all of you and more, pitted you one against the other to fully catalog your abilities. You're my initial force. Others will be summoned as their abilities are required." And he starts to lag a bit at the end of that little speech, just trying to tell them, look, I've studied all of you people. I know what I'm doing. I picked the characters who are legitimately best suited to help do what needs to be done. And Dr. Polaris is all for just rushing him because he's so weak, but Arion, who seems to have attached himself to Dr. Polaris for some reason, says, just stay back. If this is going to help Atlantis, let's hear this guy out. Even the Psycho Pirate is on the Monitor's side here because, quote, the Psycho Pirate knows true madness when he hears it. And then finally, one more voice comes to the Monitor's aid. As Lila walks back in, she has recharged herself, I guess, and has been able to convert herself back into Harbinger. So she walks in, and she, at the top of page 12, then proceeds to outline to the assembled heroes and villains exactly what it is they're going to need to do. She tells them that there are, in 5 crucial eras, as she puts them, 5 time periods, throughout time, the Monitor has planted certain devices powerful enough to halt the antimatter tide. 5 eras which coincide with the existence of heroes such as you. Yeah, yeah, no coincidence, certainly, because Wolfman needs to put in his guest stars. So then, basically, what these characters are going to be doing is that they're going to be dispatched as security. That they're going to be the guards, the sentinels who are going to protect these devices that the Monitor has constructed from attempts made by the Monitor's enemy, that mysterious, faceless enemy, at this point yet unseen and yet unheard, but that will change by the end of this issue, and protect these devices from any attempt made by the enemy to destroy them. And Earth 2 Superman is all on board. Blue Beetle wants to know where it is they're going. Harbinger replies simply by zapping everybody and sending them where they need to go. And with that, the satellite is empty of everyone except Monitor and Lila, Harbinger, and also Alex Luthor, as we'll see in a few pages later. They've all been dispatched into 5 teams of 3 sent throughout time and space. Harbinger is left to her own thoughts, and she mutters under her breath, "Rest now, Monitor. Conserve your strength, while I must alert the other." So there you are. The other is this mysterious foe we've been hearing about. And with tears in her eyes, Harbinger is kind of accepting, as this dark, corrupting force gets a more and more complete hold over her. While she's still able to mourn for the Monitor, for what she knows that she inevitably must do to him, she thinks to herself, "Forgive me, though you have been my father and more, I now betray you." So this seems like a good spot to stop and reflect.
Absolutely. And we are almost about halfway through the book by now.
Pretty close to it.
Yeah. It's 25 pages. So.
Yeah. I'm thinking we can at least get the next page in, though, before we call it quits. But
yeah, because that's a fairly important
Oh,
page
very,
too.
yeah. But let's just think about what's been going on in these last few pages first.
Yep. Yeah, like you said, hot off the heels of issue 1. Still not a lot in terms of, that was sort of one of my frustrating things about rereading some of the stuff, we don't really get an explanation of all of this kind of stuff until issue 4. Is it 4 or is it 5? 5. I think it's 5.
What happens in 5?
Where all the heroes and villains go up to the satellite.
Oh,
right? Isn't that 5? I think that's 5.
Ooh.
Yeah, because it's the one on the front. The cover is with all the faces, right?
Oh. All right. You know what? I happen to have the trade right here next to me.
That 2-page spread.
Oh yeah, you're right. It is issue 5, Worlds in Limbo. There they all are on the satellite. The Monitor is safely dead, and all these characters have been summoned.
Because he's still sort of talking just almost poetically, and your worlds are going to die, but I'm not going to really tell you all this, just trust me and go do my bidding. And it's kind of
it's an oratory. He's putting on a rhetorical performance here.
Yeah, and it really kind of speaks to the idea that as I was sort of rereading it, that as much of a point of as important a character as he is not the most important character in terms of the ones created for this story, right? We saw him for how many, a whole year, whatever it was before this series started. We see him. He is the cliffhanger of issue 1. He's here at issue 2. It's no great mystery that by 4 he's dead. And you start to realize, he never was the point. He never was the one that was going to get the heroes through to the end. Whether he's the Obi-Wan of this story, that he knows he has to die, because he does. I mean, he already prefaced it. If not in this issue, he will later. He knows what his role is. His role is not to live. And I thought some of that was frustrating that he wouldn't tell, but yet, is that also part of the plan, that he has to let these people go through this themselves. He has to let Lila go through it. He's waiting for Alexander to grow up because he has a new plan now that he has that character, so it's a little frustrating, like, just say something. But it's, I did like this sequence. From a purely writer's point of view, kudos to Marv Wolfman. Everybody but Killer Frost has dialogue in this 1, 2, 3, 4 page sequence.
Yep, and she's got a good reason not to speak.
Yeah, because she's googly eyes for Firestorm. So, here is a major event with 15 characters, and all 14 at least of them get spotlighted, in a way that, kind of makes sense that all these characters would talk. A lot of it is superhero comics. Just you got to give everybody FaceTime. I get that, but it works. It worked for me in this scene, that everybody had their turn. I like that.
Yeah, it's a difficult juggling act to execute. And it's only going to get harder for Wolfman as the series rambles on and more characters have to strut and fret their hour upon the stage. But yeah, I agree. He pulls it off pretty well.
Especially because he has to recap issue 1. And short of doing it Chris Claremont style with a giant narration box, he decides to do it with Perez and do it in dialogue and do it in the monitor screen, that monitor screen right there, that is the whole Earth 3 sequence right there, all those little circlets are exactly what happens to Earth 3. So, now we haven't seen that destruction in this issue, but you're seeing it there all the way from beginning to end. So that's a nice little visual cue to remind you of what's going on with the antimatter cloud. We got all 15 characters, the Great 15. We got Lila standing almost like she was in issue 1. It's a lot of information that he put out here, and I know when you turn that page from page 8 to 9, that's a lot of information. It's a lot of balloons. It's typical Perez artwork with very small panels and a lot of characters. So when people say that Crisis is daunting, this is one of those 2-page spreads where I sort of say, yeah, I guess it is, but, it's the stuff I covet. It's the stuff I love.
Yeah, and I'll get the transition there between pages 8 and 9 and 10. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's I'm kind of glad that we had all these prologue pages, all these little scenes with Anthro, Legion, Batman, and so forth. It helps to, and I think that actually makes it a little more effective than just diving right back into the story from where we left off at the end of issue 1. It allows us to build back up to a sort of crescendo in the course of this issue, so that we can. We had all that time and all that action going on in the first issue before we finally got to the Monitor's reveal. And so this way we can... Wolfman sort of regenerated the reader's suspense with the introductory pages of this issue before we get back into the main narrative thread here.
Yeah.
And we learn what the Monitor has in mind.
Especially it's also, the book itself is 25 pages, and at this point in comics we're only usually 22, 23. So he's got 2 more pages to play with, and, so clearly his pacing of it is Again, I know people say it's daunting, but it's you almost can't read it as a regular comic because it's not. It's not a regular comic.
Yes, that was the whole idea.
Yeah.
It's a comic that kind of kills regular comics.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's any big points on my list. I don't know. Do you have anything big? Any of the big points about these panels?
I don't know
these
about
pages?
big, but I just want to add my voice to yours as far as the circular panels being a very tightly condensed shorthand for the Earth 3 sequence. It's an effective device. It's like little portholes into apocalypse. And I don't think I do have anything really major about these 2 pages.
Okay, I'll just start from the top. Some things I wrote, some footnotey things. The Great 15, the panel. I love. I'm hitting a lot of Perez stuff here, like all the different heights and all the different body types. You can see how Cyborg is really tall. Like he's taller than Obsidian. He's taller than Dawnstar, even though she's a step back from him. The way people stand. I love the way that people stand. Psycho Pirate with his arms folded in front of him. Firebrand, she has him on her hips. Simon, he has his hands in his sleeves of his tunic. Blue Beetle, arms down. Arion's got his cape wrapped around him. Most of the ones that are, heroes like John Stewart, Obsidian, Cyborg, all hands down. I dig that. I dig some of the, and like, look at Blue Beetle. He's kind of got the whole, macho stand up straight thing, but there's a slight tilt, kind of like, wary. Maybe he's a little bit wary. Maybe he's a little bit.
His shoulder is hunching a little bit, almost defensively.
Yeah.
Shows you that he's on his guard.
Yeah, Dawnstar kind of she's a little bit bent at the waist and kind of maybe like she's looking around or tracking something. There's some great storytelling there. It's not just 15 people standing shoulder to shoulder and all looking the same. So last issue we talked, there was that one scene that transitioned last issue into the Monitor satellite, and we had this whole thought balloon thing. We were reading Monitor's thoughts. We still hadn't seen his face yet. And he mentioned in that scene, he said, already I lost yet another Earth, something I lost 5 heroes, right? And here he clearly says the last contained, already more than 1,000 universes have perished. The last contained the world you know as Earth 3. So, I had asked, is he calling the crime syndicate heroes? Was it a little bit of, poetic license?
Yeah, sure. Well, they were kind of behaving a little bit like heroes at the last.
Yeah. So that was a nice little connection just to kind of go back and go, okay, so, I mean, who knows? Wolfman could have messed up as well.
Yeah, I think that's a little more likely, actually. Yeah, because I can remember in one of the last Monitor cameos before Crisis itself finally broke out, and I'm pretty sure it was one that was written by Wolfman. I think it was a DC Comics Presents story with Superman and Forgotten Heroes.
Ah.
The Monitor turned to Lila and says, focus our attentions upon Earth 3, for I feel that is where this menace will begin. And yet we're told that, there were some 1,000 universes to perish before Earth 3, so nothing really began on Earth 3. It wasn't even the first Earth to be destroyed in Crisis number 1.
Mm-hmm.
So Wolfman is working from kind of a sliding timeline here, which is a nice way of saying that he's not, he's screwing up all the time. So,
I do, the point of putting a number to it is kind of, it's funny to me, right? Like he says, already more than 1,000. Well, that's not infinite, and it's kind of, I don't know. There's something about that. First of all, there's something about it in the sense of comparing it to the title of the entire maxi series, but then it also sort of speaks to, like the DC New 52, where they're going, wow, it's so limited, only 52 universes, Well, hey, at one point, Monitor said there was only a little bit more than 1,000. 1,005, as opposed, if we think about how many are left.
Good point.
Yeah.
But, yeah, if there were literally infinite Earths, the Anti-Monitor would have no chance of winning. Because no matter how many universes he destroyed, there would always be more and more and more.
True. Or if he, or you could look at it the opposite way. If he had conquered, half of infinity or more than half of infinity, my brain's going to explode. Could he be that much more powerful? What's another 5 universes at this point if he has infinity behind him? But no, I get your point.
Well, clearly the Anti-Monitor is a geek and needs to have a complete set.
All slabbed and graded. I do like his description of what happens, where he says, I'm going to take him literally here, where he says, and then came nothingness, silent and invisible. And I know we talked about last issue about the antimatter cloud, like literally erasing people, not disintegrating them, but erasing them. And I don't know if we talked about the sound, what that sound would be like, but I love that idea of no sound, just a white wall, literally erasing people out of not only their existence, but comic book existence. And this whole idea of nothingness. And, I remember in our Blackest Night episodes talking to you about, Necron as a being of nothingness, not necessarily death or blackness, but nothingness. And what is that, So I thought that I really like that descriptive narrative, whether it's poetic or not.
Well, close enough for my money. Let's say that.
Yeah. A little bit of some more Perez stuff here. So if you go up to the Great 15, them standing there, you can see Geoforce is standing behind King Solivar. So when he goes to yell at Simon down there in the middle, one of the middle panels on page 10, he goes, it kind of looks like he's either going in front or behind Blue Beetle to get to him, right? And that's exactly the layout that Perez has.
Uh-huh. You can see Firebrand's head there down at the bottom of the panel, which is right where she would be standing too.
Yeah, I mean that's attention to detail in terms of staging, blocking. Notice where you started your characters, and bring them into it. Like move your characters around in ways that make sense.
Now, speaking of Simon. When he attacks the Monitor, he's upset because Simon says that the Monitor turned down Simon's request for weapons and refused his needs. Do you know when, if any place, that happened?
That I'm fairly certain probably happened off panel. I remember we talked about last issue. There was a Tales of the Teen Titans issue.
Right, number 58, I think, which kind of think of it, I think that wasn't released until October of 84, cover dated October of 85, the same as Flash number 350. So it's kind of like the very last super late Monitor cameo, in that it shows how Simon is recruited for this deal. Right in the middle of a battle between the Fearsome Five and the Titans, as I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he sort of plucked away and kept on the satellite. I think he even mentioned that last issue or something.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So I just take that as kind of a back, just to get the information out. Like so does Dr. Polaris says it, so does Simon. I haven't read that era of Titans in such a long time that there's no way I would be able to remember it without going back and looking it up. But I don't remember them two ever having a meeting in the way that some other ones did, some other villains did. I mean, I remember Wolfman talking about asking other writers and editors to have people in the Crisis as sacrificial lambs to the greater good, and that's the whole reason why he created Cole, and he also put Simon in that same position, that they were going to be people that, I don't mean to spoil a later issue, but
yeah, as a gesture of good faith. You're sort of like, hey, everybody else, look, I'm killing off some of my own characters too.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've already touched on the fact that as a point of honor, Wolfman is he resolved not to kill any characters that were created before he was born.
Right. But if he is going to kill off one of his characters, he's going to give him a damn principal place in the story.
Mm-hmm. And so Simon he does have something else to do, relatively important, I guess, later on.
Superman's comment that he heard of the Monitor. This is the Superman of present-day Earth 2, present as of the 80s. So I imagine if he heard of the Monitor, it probably took place off-panel of Infinity Inc. He wasn't in that series a lot, but that's the only thing I can sort of think of that...
Yep, either Infinity Inc. or maybe the Huntress, like, backup series of Wonder Woman.
Right. Let's see. Okay, so he talks about this whole, one of the things that I'm looking for in these issues as it builds is the not only the explanation of what is happening, but the explanation of the villain. And Monitor explains on page 11, and he says, this is all linked to, that he is linked to all positive matter. And really that should be a clue, right? Like, it should kind of be a clue to, if you know your Green Lantern history or something like it. I'm sure this is where longtime readers of DC at this point probably went, oh, positive matter. Well, I mean, they're clearly saying antimatter. There's only one antimatter universe in DC history. I think, I guess my point is that I certainly didn't make any of those connections as a kid, even if I did know what Quard was and all that, but somebody probably was able to take that information and do something with it.
Well, and if they hadn't put 2 and 2 together by then, well, going on to page 13 would probably provide the last piece of the puzzle they needed.
Yeah. Because really, for a lot of people, they just assumed Darkseid was the big bad.
Really?
Yeah.
That was the assumption made by people reading comics at that time?
I even think in one of the letter pages in one of the later issues where they talk about issue 1 or 2, they said they do this whole thing about, light versus dark. It's got to be Darkseid. If you think about it, Darkseid and his New Gods, they were in that JLA story. They were in Legion of Superheroes, but they weren't really absorbed into the DC universe just yet, and maybe people just assumed that was going to be the big bad. But I remember that theory. I know it's in one of the letter columns in the next couple issues, and I seem to remember people talking about it at the comic store from way back when.
Well, for my part, kind of happy that it didn't turn out that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think you and I see eye to eye about that the Fourth World characters work best when they're kind of off in their own corner, and their interactions with the rest of the DC universe as a whole are kept to a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we do get a little bit of Darkseid cameo later on in the series, but definitely not the main villain.
Yeah. I'm just shouting out some things, so if you have anything, by all means. I have a thing here about page 11. Okay, the dialogue line about what's at stake. What's at stake, it's greater than any morality of good versus evil. And I kind of like that. It kind of heightens the level of the stakes of what this event is really about. Yep. It's not about let's fight somebody, beat them up, and we win.
Yeah, it's not about good guys versus bad guys, even though that's the way Wolfman kind of originally envisioned this project when he was a kid. And we do still have issue number 9, which is probably the closest thing to his original concept there is in this series, where we really do have a big all-out brouhaha between villains and heroes. But the way the Monitor is conceiving all of this, it's far less hero versus villain as it is hero and villain versus the incipient end of all there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the second time the Monitor has made a remark like that, too. The first issue, he's talking about how it's going to take both so-called heroes and villains to face this crisis. So, which might be some support for your theory that when he was talking about those 5 heroes he lost in the first issue, maybe he was talking about the crime syndicate.
Okay, yeah. Somebody on page 10 mentions the word Earthlings, and certainly Superman and Dawnstar are not. Well, I mean, Dawnstar kind of, that's debatable. Because she comes from a planet that all those Legion planets, they all migrated at some point from Earth in the past.
So yeah, her world of Starhaven was kind of like an outer space American Indian reservation.
Yeah. I do. Okay, here's something that on page 10, Superman says, "No power exists that can defeat us all." And at first I wrote kind of very cynically, I was like, oh, really? Well, you haven't met the Anti-Monitor. But then you stop and think about who is the one that does actually put the beat down. And then you go, you know what, Superman, Kal-El, you are right. No power does exist that can defeat you. You know what? You're right. I'll give you a fist bump for that.
Yeah. Any character in all of comics has a right to brag on himself a little bit, and especially when he's modest enough to just collectively boast, not just himself, but that can defeat us all. Yeah, that's it. He's earned that. Yeah.
Again, it's that interesting thing of, this is Superman of Earth 2. Many people just automatically jump that he's the Golden Age Superman, and technically he's not, right? Like, the concept of an Earth 2 Superman didn't start out at Action Comics number 1 in 1938, Do you remember where exactly he falls?
I believe it's an issue of the Justice League of America, the original series, written by Dennis O'Neil, I'm pretty sure. I want to say it's somewhere in the 70s. I'm not sure the original issue number, but that's usually considered the first appearance of the Earth 2 Superman as such.
Interesting. So it's not even probably 15 to 20 years old by this point.
Yeah, I'm trying to. This would have been very late '60s, I think, when that story was published. So not definitely not 20 years.
Yeah, I mean he certainly absorbed all those stories, but it's not like he was created out of Zeus's forehead from that point. It's a little different. So I like that. I like that he's given all those things that. Any other writer probably would have put Earth 1 Kal-El in that position, and Wolfman is smart enough to give that to quote unquote the original. Not really the original, but the original. Harbinger talks about the 5 crucial eras that are that coincide with the existence of heroes such as you, which when we actually get to each of them, I have a lot of questions about that. But we can certainly say, we can kind of think, okay, we're going to get another tour through the DC universe. I do like the idea of the presence of heroic ideals and how that creates a focal point, and that's why the Monitor is placing these devices there. It's almost like Wolfman saying, all right, you're going to live. This era, I'm going to put a pinpoint here. Is it his way of showing? Really, is it his way of showing why Earth is important? Like, all these pinpoints come down to Earth. Like, why didn't they stick one in Vega, and why didn't they stick one in, if you really want to go, I guess it's because the Earth is the thing that got separated in the multiverse.
Yeah.
So
Just cosmic jingoism. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another one of those. The creative decisions on Wolfman's part that's a little easier to defend extra-textually than it is within the story itself.
Right. And then she says, I'm going to send you to 5 different eras, but she winds up sending 7 blasts all the way out. And I'm like, whoa, wait, you just said 5, and there's actually 7. So Perez probably should have just drew 5.
Probably, yeah.
So I'll let him go.
Overlook those 2 little rays at the bottom. Either that or just assume that's Harbinger sending out for pizza and smokes or something. Yeah, and the panel right above that, another thing that was changed between issue and collection, that single color image of Harbinger sending out those spheres of energy from her forehead.
Mm-hmm.
In the comic, it's blue, but it was recolored as magenta in the trade. No real idea why. I think it looks a little better blue, personally.
Yeah. The only other thing I have here is I do like that Arion is able to sense her evilness, although he probably should have sensed it early on, but I can forgive him since he was in the cold and, in issue 1, and maybe the stakes were higher because they were both yelling at each other and, fighting and whatever. So now he's really starting to sense her, sense something's not right with her.
Yeah. He's probably internally worried that if he speaks up and warns everybody else about what he's sensing in her, he doesn't want to do anything that might jeopardize this mission on the off chance that it really will help Atlantis if he cooperates with this woman and her mentor, no matter how sinister she may appear to him. Mm-hmm. That might help explain why he decides to keep his mouth shut about what he's sensing within Harbinger. And there is indeed an internal conflict going on in Harbinger at this point. Conflict that will be pretty swiftly silenced, but at least at this stage at the bottom of page 12, there's enough of Harbinger/Lila's true personality in there that she can feel some advance remorse for what she knows she's going to be compelled to do.
Yeah. And it'll be good to note, I'm going to keep in my notes here that they're sending them to these places so that they can protect, like you said, these devices that are powerful enough to halt the antimatter tide, because the true nature of these forks, these tuning forks, which we don't know what they're called just yet, kind of changes a lot. Like as I read on, or the meaning or why they're there. Like it's not as concrete as we're told here. So we'll get to that when we get to that, though. So, all right, that's all I really had about that.
All right, well,
there's a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more than I had. All right, do we have enough left in the tank to cover another page or two?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah, I think if we can get through page 14, that's exactly midway through the issue.
Sounds good.
All right, and it's also the end of an act, sort of, because then we jump straight into the first of the away teams and their mission in the far future.
Cool.
So, going into page 13, we have a couple of little 2-page interludes going on here that take us away from the Monitor's chosen Great 15. We jump now to a world shrouded in mystery. A world very few know even exists. Yet this tiny globe in the very center of the known universe controls the power infinite. This is Oa, homeworld of the Guardians of the Universe. And we see a few of the aforementioned Guardians in conference with one another, as a whole bunch of them gather together in a central chamber of the Green Lantern Corps headquarters, right in front of the central power battery. They're muttering among themselves. Apparently their instruments have shown them the same thing that Brainiac 5's instruments have shown him in the 30th century, perhaps in a little bit more detail, since the Guardians are a little closer to the nature of the threat that's now consuming the multiverse than Brainiac 5 is. They're conversing among each other in hushed tones. The Guardians are. This is something that they've seen before. They recognize it. They monitor all the galaxies, as is their wont. All 3,600 sectors of Guardian guarded space. They say to each other that they've discovered the presence of this threat 12 cycles ago, a power insinuating the universe, a power which has already swept through most of the other dimensional planes, and if they don't act swiftly, it's going to consume their universe as well. They need to get their core together, and just as they're about to summon their entire amassed force of their Green Lantern Corps, a voice rings out in the chamber. I believe it's the first time that Is this the first time that we're hearing the voice of the Anti-Monitor?
Yes.
I don't think we'd heard it any time in issue 1.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain. We kind of heard that chuckle.
Right.
But I can't remember if that was a Shadow Demon or if that was Anti-Monitor, but I'm fairly certain.
All right. So, in just these jagged exclamatory word balloons, the mysterious enemy of the Monitor makes his voice heard and says, "No, Guardians, it is too late. You shall no more summon your soldiers than prove a threat to my plans." And now, key detail, what began with you so many centuries ago ends with you now. And the Guardians are then struck down by a massive power bolt fired out by their own central power battery. And the final panel is kind of an overhead shot. We can see the front of the power battery, and on the floor beneath it, the strewn bodies, limp and unconscious, of these extremely powerful and ancient immortals just scattered all over the floor. So they have been completely removed from the playing field. Pieces taken from the chessboard by this little gambit. So there's your one page of Oa goings on.
Yeah. And it is kind of interesting that, as he says, what began with you, and yet, outside of Jon Stewart and another scene later and a couple other scenes near the end, the Green Lanterns are not a part of this story as much as you think they should be. Now, I don't know if that's because Wolfman is, sort of saying, okay, look, I'm taking all this lore from stuff that's been building in that title. I don't want this to turn into a Green Lantern event. It's not about that.
True.
And I really, upon this reading, especially in terms of, like, say, not only Blackest Night, but Infinite Crisis, which had a lot of, like, Green Lantern stuff in it. And certainly what happens here to the Guardians, they finally get their revenge on the Anti-Monitor in Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night, so like it's an interesting thing to mine a corner of the DC universe, but not necessarily allow them to be the forefront.
Well, Wolfman, so here's another way to interpret the remark the Anti-Monitor made. What began with you so many centuries ago ends with you now. In a way, this whole crisis thing began with the Green Lantern Corps because Marv Wolfman was writing the Green Lantern title, and he received that letter from a reader wondering why they didn't do something to straighten out the continuity, pare down the parallel Earths, and so forth. So in a way, this all did start with the Green Lanterns and the Guardians. Looking at it, in a meta kind of way. And there's a more literal explanation for that word balloon, which I'm sure we'll get to in a sec. But maybe, since Wolfman is quite familiar with the Green Lanterns, having written their adventures for a couple of years, maybe this can be construed as a gesture of respect to the Green Lanterns and the Guardians, and that he goes right ahead and just wipes them off the chessboard here, because maybe he thinks that the Guardians and the Green Lanterns are so powerful that the threat would be too easily resolved if they were directly involved.
Yeah, I can buy that. I mean, it's a nice way of putting the core. I mean, the core has sort of been the core and the Guardians of the Universe have been around, and they've had their dealings not only with like Hal Jordan, but certainly with the Justice League and Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. So they are a higher level concept, not necessarily like Celestials or anything like that. And certainly they're not omniscient, or, they're almost like proactive watchers, in the DC universe, where they don't do much. They're not quite, at least in this era of DC, they're not quite the level that they are later, where they truly are like everybody knows about them, and they know that they're like the oldest living beings. And I mean, they are here too, but, well, I don't know. I don't know if we have all that backstory on them. I guess we do by this point. I mean, certainly we will by issue 7,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I I think you're right. I think it speaks to that level of, look, these are not just, they're worth the anti-monitor taking his time out to say, all right, I'm going to attack first on this one.
Right. You know that. I know that. The Anti-Monitor knew it, and Marv Wolfman knew it.
Yeah. Now, to the literal definition of that, I assume you're going to go with Krona.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because Wolfman, I think he actually teased to a couple of fan publications back in those days that the whole thing kind of hinges on a very old Green Lantern story from years ago. And that specifically is Green Lantern, Silver Age series number 40, which was an encounter between... It was the first team-up between Hal Jordan and Alan Scott in the Green Lantern series. The two had met before in like Justice Society stories. Right. But this was their first one-on-one team-up. And in the course of that story, Krona was the main villain, and we learn his origin story and the origin of the Guardians. In fact, I think the story was entitled The Origin of the Guardians. And we hear the whole story about how Krona, the renegade Guardian, Owen scientist, conducted a forbidden experiment to look into a time scope back in time to see the origin of the universe. He sees the cosmic hand with the swirling mass of stars in its palm, and then the huge explosion happens, and that was the origin of the antimatter universe. And it was also the emission of evil into the universe. That was really what was stressed in that first story. Mm-hmm. That was the Krona was responsible for the admission of evil into the positive matter universe, and it was for that reason the Owens felt compelled to become the guardians of the universe and devote the rest of their immortal existences to combating this evil that their wayward brother Krona had unleashed. And then they punished Krona by disembodying him, reducing him to harmless energy, and sending him to forever circulate around the universe. So that's kind of how this all started, because thanks to Krona, thanks to Oa, that is why the antimatter universe exists, and that is therefore why the Anti-Monitor exists, and that is therefore why this whole crisis thing is happening.
So is the spin of also creating the multiverse, was that created for Crisis? Completely
absent from the original story. So yes, it was. That wrinkle was created by Wolfman for Crisis. That story was seen as the origin of the anti. Yeah, thinking back on it, I'm not even sure if the antimatter universe of Quard was mentioned at that point. But it definitely mentioned that evil was created as a result. It was the original sin. It was kind of a bit of a faint biblical allegory going on there. Krona's quest for knowledge is like Adam reaching up for the forbidden fruit from the tree. Right. But yeah, that definitely no mention. Even though Alan Scott, it was an Earth 1, Earth 2 story. Alan Scott played a role in that story. No mention, or even like the ghost of a mention, was made that the positive matter multiverse resulted from this cataclysmic occurrence that happened thanks to Krona's experiment. No, pretty much just the birth of evil, right, and possibly of the antimatter universe, but nothing was said about the multiple positive matter Earths coming out of this.
Which makes sense, because that wasn't as big of a concept as it would be decades later.
Oh, no. There were only, at that point, 2 or 3 Earths tops.
Right. Huh. Yeah. I mean, I know we're referencing later issues, but that issue number 7 is so important.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah. And we're not going to get to it for a while. Yeah. So.
But when I was recently interviewed by a reporter from the Bowling Green State University Alumni Association's newsletter Apparently, since this is the Crisis anniversary year, somebody, his editor, I guess, caught wind of the fact that had heard about my thesis, and this guy actually called to interview me. There's going to be a little blurb in the next issue of the Alumni Association newsletter about my thesis. And one of the things he asked me was, what's your favorite scene in Crisis? And I, of course, couldn't commit to just one. I reeled off a list of about a half a dozen of them. But I said if I had to pick one, it would probably be that extended sequence in issue 7 when we get the origin of the Guardians, the DC multiverse, both monitors, the life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah. Because I know I'm not going to jump the gun, but I know he weaved a few other tidbits into that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so maybe
Probably
in the back of my mind.
Stuff that he had conceived possibly when this was still supposed to be the history of the DC universe as opposed to the Crisis that it became.
Right. And kind of looking at the larger picture and going, all right, well, great. If that's what happens, well, we can certainly put this on top of this, and this kind of relates to this, so why don't I just connect that? It really is kind of fascinating, and I should have probably known that whole thing about the multiverse, but that's an interesting, fun little fact. All right, so I like that he calls the Green Lanterns soldiers, because I do think that back in the 80s and until Jeff Johns got a hold of the Green Lantern book, the Corps really was a corps. It was more militaristic,
right, as opposed to like a cosmic police force.
Yeah, and Johns is the one that sort of made them more, with the rules and the regulations,
right, assigning 2 lanterns per sector, like a partnership, so like every sector had its own little buddy cop duo.
Right, and the whole thing with like Ethan Van Sciver drawing the emblem that would shine off of their, the little thing, the lantern symbol would shine off the emblem, like a badge. Like a badge, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting shift in perception about the Green Lanterns from back then. That people may not be aware of, and maybe they don't even really think of the current stuff or, the John stuff as them being a police force. But I mean, it's kind of very, you can sort of see it. And I think in interviews he might've said it, but I always remember them more as a military force. I mean, they are called the Green Lantern Corps.
Right.
Well, I guess so. I guess is there such a thing as a police corps too?
Yeah, not there might be. I don't think I don't usually associate that term with the police. No.
Yeah.
More like a police, like a squad or a precinct,
right,
or a department.
He calls the the narration about controls of the power infinite. Another descriptive term of the green energy, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I guess so.
And there is something, again, this is all hindsight, but I love this kind of thinking. There's something really interesting about the Anti-Monitor speaking to the Guardians through their battery when in Blackest Night he is actually trapped in a Black Lantern. And it also, I think it's because of a later issue, but I'll drop it in here too, about the whole, if you know your later Jeff Johns, history of who else is in the Green Lantern battery at this point. It's kind of interesting that Parallax is in there, and so the Anti-Monitor sort of speaks through the battery, and is there a way to sort of connect everything that goes on with Parallax and goes on with the Anti-Monitor being an avatar or guardian of fear later, all that stuff. It's interesting to kind of connect it all.
Yeah. And then assume that Jeff Johns was thinking along the same lines.
Right. I always call Jeff John, he's like the heir apparent to Marv Wolfman. So I just like that little bit of connection there. Go ahead.
Nope, nothing.
Oh, okay. And then the other thing, we sort of already talked about this, is look how bold and brazen the Anti-Monitor is to go after the Guardians, right? But he doesn't quite go after the New Gods, does he? Again.
True. Although, as we see much later on, I mentioned that there was a bit of a Darkseid cameo. Darkseid actually does act to aid, the good guys against the Anti-Monitor, primarily because I think he might actually be a little bit worried that this conflict might actually spill over and affect the Fourth World, and he can't have that.
Right. And there was also again, from a writing standpoint, even though a page earlier, it says Harbinger sends them to different timelines, to different Earths. What's the exact wording? And it does mention dimensions, right? So the whole idea of, where is Apocalypse? Where is New Genesis? Are they on the far reaches of the galaxy, or are they in another dimension altogether? And it's kind of one of the excuses why they said a world like Earth C could still exist after the crisis, because it's not technically a multiverse; it's sort of dimensional,
right.
Which is, splitting hairs, if you ask me. But no pun intended.
Waka waka. Yeah, but you're right. It wasn't originally thought of as one of the vibrationally separated parallel Earths of the multiverse. It was in another dimension, although the difference between parallel Earth and parallel dimension is academic at best.
And pocket universe and all that other craziness.
Right. And of course, now Earth C, a.k.a. Earth 26, is considered a part of the multiverse.
Right. So, okay. That's... Yeah, I do like that page. We'll get a little bit more of that in later issues. Mm-hmm. A
little foreshadowing of the extended historicization that Wolfman is doing here.
Yeah, and it's it's cool. I do. There was something very grand about having that little sequence in there.
Yeah, well, just the mere fact that the Monitor's opponent is able to dispatch the Guardians that quickly, that serves Wolfman's purposes in yet another way. I mean, I said it might be considered a gesture of respect to the Guardians that he saw fit to remove them from the playing field so quickly, but also it prevents him as a writer to have to come up with what the Guardians' response would be to what's going on, and also it makes his newly minted antagonist, the Anti-Monitor, seem that much more formidable in that he's able to take out such a well-established, venerable source of cosmic power in the DC universe with such ease.
Yeah. I do like, sorry, I missed this. One of the first things they say, we monitor all the galaxies, right? It's kind of interesting that he uses that word.
A lot of that going around right now.
Yeah. Because clearly they may have monitored, but they failed. But he also says, we discovered its presence 12 cycles ago. So what is 12 cycles? I mean, is that months? Does that coincide with how long the Monitor has been monitoring people? Is it, it's a little bit of a weakness on their part that they kind of maybe took it for granted.
Right. They take too much. They've become kind of old and a little too circumspect, too deliberative. They take too long and, debating and contemplating before they actually take action. Yeah, as opposed to, their most gifted agent, the light of the core, Hal Jordan, who was renowned as kind of a spitfire who always slung his ring first and asked questions later.
Yeah. And that'll be that'll be a nice touch to keep in mind when we get back to them later, too, this whole idea of action and inaction, so, with the Guardians.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep, so them just waiting this long to act on this thing after 12 cycles is consistent with their characterization.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you want to hazard page 14 here and then call it a night?
Yep, this is good. It's a nice little connection to a previous scene, and like you said, it's a nice little stopping point.
Yeah, there's probably less to say about it than about page 13 anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so page 14, we cut to Metropolis on Earth 1, and thank you, Marv Wolfman, for making sure we know which Earth we're on this time. And a great little shot to begin with, a POV shot of Superman's hands with an aerial shot of Metropolis framed between them down below. Superman is flying to a rendezvous on the top of the Daily Planet building, And so we see here, this is the first appearance of the Earth 1 Superman in Crisis. We've already seen, as you pointed out earlier, the first Earth 1 Batman appearance in the series in this issue. And now we get both of the world's finest duo having a tete-a-tete, which only happens in dire emergencies, which happen every single month in the pages of World's Finest Comics in the mid-'80s. So these two are conferring. Batman has called on Superman to report on what happened with him and the Joker and the Flash. So he relates to Superman the whole story that we saw several pages ago. And Batman says that, quote, "It was just an image, but I heard him call out, and none of us knows what happened to him after his trial." Literally true, because the trial hasn't happened yet. It won't be published until October of 85. And Batman, pessimist that he is, fears the worst. But then, before their conversation can progress much further, something else weird happens. A weird crisis-related happening. Pariah pops up with them on the roof of the Daily Planet, and he says, "Praise heaven, help at last." And he then tries to explain himself to the World's Finest. He explains that he's called Pariah. He tells them that both of their legends have reached his world long before his exile. So there's a little detail of Pariah's personal past there. He gets out a quick warning to Superman and Batman that their world and their universe is now dying, as have the other Earths before it, when suddenly he's sucked away. So it can't be dying that quickly, or otherwise he would be forced to stay and watch it die. But apparently some other Earth is dying first. But Superman and Batman are then left feeling very confused and alarmed. And Batman remarks on the similarity between what happened just now with Pariah and what happened with the Flash a little while ago. And he reiterates his question from the bottom of page 8. What's going on here? Mm-hmm. And that's the end of that interlude.
Yeah. Right. What'd you make of this scene?
Well, as we mentioned a little bit earlier on, even if the Trinity is not such a big established idea in the pre-Crisis DC universe, the World's Finest duo definitely was. So much so that they, as I just said, teamed up to battle threats large and small. By the mid-'80s, it was more small than large, I would argue. Every month in the pages of World's Finest Comics. That was always a Superman-Batman team. Well, not always, but it's traditionally it has been a Superman-Batman team-up book. So here we're seeing the World's Finest duo getting a chance to confer and just getting the big marquee players onto the stage here and really ever so gradually and subtly increasing the reader's sense of the import of what's going on in the story. Seeing these two icons get together to talk shop and, just to kind of gravely discuss recent events and decide assess the level of threat. And Superman is thinking to himself, he's remarking to himself how unusual it is to hear Batman sound afraid, which is the same thing that Chuck was saying in his post on our forums and the same thing we were saying to each other. Whenever Batman is actually scared, something really big is going down. And but then as he arrives at the Daily Planet building roof, he's thinking, well, I'm sure the two of us can handle whatever it is. So he's kind of echoing the words of his Earth 2 counterpart when he said on board the Monitor satellite, no power exists that can defeat us all. He touches down, he talks to Batman, he mentions that he's late because there was a volcanic eruption in the middle of the Mediterranean. Strangest thing, too, totally unexpected. So neither he nor Batman knows just what that means at this point, but having heard what the Monitor was saying about how natural disasters like earthquakes and volcanoes are an early symptom of a world's being primed for consumption by antimatter, we know that we've got reason to fear. And then Pariah shows up, and that just intensifies the sensation of fear. So this is another one of these acts of rupture here. Superman and Batman getting together for a conference. It's, like I said, a monthly occurrence in DC because World's Finest Comics was still being published. And but they're interrupted in medias res here by the appearance of Pariah, kind of a harbinger, to coin a phrase, of the apocalypse here. And so now we have not only a frightened Superman, not only a spooked Batman, but a spooked Superman.
Yeah.
So there's double the ominousness. So that's the way I read this scene. It's just an ever-expanding ripple of alarm that is spreading throughout the DC universe and through the minds of the readers.
Right. And it also, when you go back to the whole idea of, okay, so Solivar asked, why us? Why us, Monitor? And if you're going to have a main initial force, I guess is what Monitor called the Great 15, right?
That's just what he called them, yeah.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense if you're going to, show the the antimatter cloud going to Earth 1. Well, it kind of makes sense that maybe you got to save the main avatars of that Earth for anything that is going to happen on Earth 1, right? So, maybe that's another reason why he used Superman of Earth 2 for the bigger picture, but when it comes down to having these scenes on Earth 1, well, he needs Superman. He needs Superman of Earth 1, he needs Batman, he needs the Titans, he needs the Outsiders, so... and again, we also said before that it helps not to always put the big guns out there right away. Otherwise, they crowd the book. Or a reader could just go, well, why don't they just do that? Because they're that powerful. I mean, this is planet moving Superman here, So even though to a degree in the early 80s he was maybe not as strong as he was in, like, say, the, 50s, 60s.
Right. Yeah, because somewhere in there was that Kryptonite No More story, which cut Superman's powers down by a third, 2/3. But as I think Neil Adams, who wrote that story at the time, later remarked, 1/3 or 2/3 of infinity is still infinity. So Superman was still pretty damn powerful. And then, the effects of that story were kind of swept under the rug over the years anyway. So yeah, by the time we got back to the early 80s, he was pretty much back to planet juggling again. But
yeah.
You may be right that he's still not quite as incredibly strong as he was in the Silver Age, though.
He strained a little bit. There's that early issue of DC Comics Presents where he pushes Earth into, like, it's either Earth or Ran, where he pushes him into a Zeta beam or something like that, and he literally is pushing the peak of a mountain, and he pushes the Earth, and it's drawn by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, and he's struggling and straining, but he pushes it, like, a couple feet or inches into some vortex, and I'm like, really? Wouldn't he just shove the mountain into the Earth if he did that? But, whatever. So, and that was, I guess that was late 70s when that series started, so.
Oh, was it DC Presents?
DC Comics Presents, yeah.
Yeah, 78.
Yeah, okay. It was one of the first 3 issues. I'm pretty sure that sequence happened, so. Anyway. What's funny is, as iconic as the Batman is for me, Perez's Superman at this point never really spoke to me. Having been so used to, say, Gil Kane or Kurt Swan or Garcia Lopez or, some of the other artists that drew some of the later issues of the Superman run. I look at this Superman and I'm like, well, he's kind of he's kind of a Garcia Lopez. He's younger than a Kurt Swan Superman, but he's not quite the Superman that I'm used to. You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's a little nebulous, the design and the feel of this character for me.
It does seem like Perez is going a little bit, off model from... maybe from he does his research. He always does.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to figure he's taking as an example whatever our art was appearing in Superman titles at the time. So I think maybe what we're seeing here is like an Eduardo Barreto Superman?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And maybe even a little bit of Gil Kane. Maybe there's a little bit Gil Kane in there. From, like, action.
Right.
But
written by Marv Wolfman.
Yeah. But yeah, I get your point about Eduardo, yeah. I love the first thing he says to Batman. Hi. Hi. Sorry, I was late. Hi. This is still the buddies. They're still, friends, even though they just had that little kerfluffle about Batman and the Outsiders, not saving Lucius Fox in another country. But, it's such a simple greeting. Here's a Superman that we don't really have anymore, which I thought was interesting.
Yep, super. Well, I'm glad you brought that kerfuffle up. Yeah, because it is Batman. He was the one who was hurt by the Justice League's decision not to go on that mission.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's the one who's reaching out to Superman for help, and Superman, just without hesitating in the least, he comes immediately.
Yeah.
And he's even big enough not to mention that little sore spot in their relationship. He just comes in and says, hi, like nothing's wrong.
Well, some of that was already fixed in World's Finest Comics 300, issue 300, which I think had already been out by this point.
I'm sure it had been, yeah.
Yeah, there was this whole, I forget what the characters were called, like the Pantheon or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Remember the CGS episode a long time ago, we talked about famous 300th issues of various things. We talked about World's Finest 300. I remember those characters. They looked like, I don't know, renegade GoBots or something. I thought they were extremely lame.
Yeah, and there was a whole thing, the Titans were in it, the Outsiders were in it, the Justice League was in it, and there was that it wraps up with the scene where they're just like scowling at each other, and then they just come together and shake hands and pat each other on the shoulder, and everything's good again. So, I think this is just pushing the Batman not knowing what's going on is, and that is in his character to call Superman. I know they did that a lot on think about Justice League, the cartoon, and Justice League Unlimited, that there are very real times where he will call upon Superman, or he'll say something like, okay, you don't now you're going to make him mad, or something like that. You know what I mean? So he knows his limits.
Yep.
And
closest thing to calling up a friend to talk that Batman ever seems to do.
Yeah. The Flash trial is referenced again, and Batman says that no one knows where he went after the trial, although I don't have those issues, but I'm fairly certain I think Kid Flash knows where he's at. So,
maybe he just kept mum about it.
Yeah.
Out of respect for Barry and his desire to have a nice, peaceful twilight years with Iris in the future. So right. So Wally just pretended he didn't know where Barry ended up.
Yeah, I would have to read that again, and I think there's a showcase of the trial. I think, or else it's its own. There's an old a trade just called the Trial of the Flash. I would love to get that again because as much as I disliked it at the time, I kind of sort of want to read it again. I absolutely do not buy that their legends reached Pariah's world, especially knowing that. I can't imagine, because this whole timeline thing is getting skewed if that's really the case. I mean, my sense is that Pariah has been flipping through all these destroyed universes for a long time. Especially if the Monitor was monitoring, also all through the Golden and Silver Age of the DC universe. So I don't know, something about that line bugs me.
That's true. Yeah, when we later on learn Pariah's origin in detail, I think we discover that he spent a lot of years, well, maybe just subjectively from his point of view, but a long time in a kind of purgatory, like a state of intense suffering before he began, blinking in and out, following. Before he was forced into becoming an apocalypse groupie, basically, and following around from destroyed Earth, forced to witness the death of each universe in succession. Right. But yeah, before that happened, he was just kind of curled up in the fetal position in limbo someplace for a good long while. So you're right, He probably would not have had a chance to hear about Superman and Batman.
Yeah. I mean, we see those, we're referencing issue 7, but, Pariah's experiments, or the reason why Pariah is Pariah, does something to the Anti-Monitor, and then what the Anti-Monitor does is basically create Quard, or he fortifies Quard, so we're talking way before Superman and Batman and Krypton, you know what I mean? So that line, which only just hit me right now as you said it, when you went through the narration of it all, the analysis of it, I went, wait a minute, that's not right, unless his world was so advanced that he could look into the future, and,
Yeah, the future of other Earths, too.
Yeah, so. I think that's it. I only had a superficial note of they never really. It's not uniform the way they designate Earth 1. Here it's Earth with no dash and 1 is spelled out. In another point, they'll say Earth dash with the number 1. So they're never consistent with how they write out these Earths.
Yep, I'm just taking a quick look at the hardcover, and yep, it's still Earth Space ONE.
Mm-hmm.
So they did not make any attempt there to make it more uniform for the collection.
The minor nitpick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's what gives these discussions of ours color.
Yeah. Who was it's John Costanza. We had John Costanza. Oh, wait. Was it John Costanza?
You may be thinking of John Workman.
I am thinking of John Workman.
Yeah, he was on CGS.
Okay.
Less sure about John Costanza.
No, it wasn't him. I'm totally thinking of somebody else. That's kind of it.
Yeah, well, that's a good stopping point. You know, we've reached the staples at the middle of the issue, so. And as I said, we'll pick back up again when we do the second part of this issue. We'll jump right back into the actions of the Great 15 as they head to the future, to the world of the Great Disaster.
Right.
We get into the scene shown on the cover.
We get to start going to the 5 heroic times.
Yeah. The 5 crucial eras, I think Harbinger calls them.
Yeah.
Loci of heroic activity.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, well, maybe it's a little cynical of me to say so, but it just makes it easier for Wolfman to work in those guest appearances. Right.
Cool. All right. I think we are done.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, all of you listening at home, thanks for sticking with us for another 3-hour gab session here. You have anything you'd like to contribute to the discussion? Any personal reminiscences you want to share? As always, those are welcome. You know, Crisis Kid stories, bits and pieces of Crisis trivia, and what have you. The place to go to share those will be to thecomicforums.com. There will be a Crisis Tapes episode 12 talkback thread there for Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 2, part 1. And that'll be up very shortly after this episode's released, so be on the lookout for it. We appreciate your feedback all the time. And it gives us something else to say on these episodes that we don't have to generate ourselves.
Good point. All right.
All right, back to Limbo with us then.
Sounds good. Pleasure talking with you.
Yep, likewise, Peter, as always. And the rest of you, we'll talk to you next time.